Good afternoon. It is October 20th, just after 1:30 p.m. We're here for a Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee work session. We're joined as well by Councilmember Mink, District Council Member for the University Boulevard Corridor Plan, in addition to committee member, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, who also is a District Council Member from the University Boulevard Corridor Plan, depending on which part of the University Boulevard Corridor you are referencing. We're joined as well by planning. We have folks from Department of Transportation representing the executive branch, as well as council staff. I just wanted to reiterate that we are continuing our work from the September 29th work session, where we begun these conversations reviewing land use and zoning recommendations for Amherst Avenue and Chestnut Ridge District. We had a very thoughtful conversation in depth with Montgomery County Department of Transportation and State Highway Administration, confirming that the dedicated bus lanes that are under discussion as part of this plan are existing and are intended to be permanent, regardless of what happens with the plan and decisions that we make, and that is part of the 2013 Countywide Transit Corridors Functional Plan, although we do have a question about whether or not to dedicate the lanes within the Four Corners area, which was a change being recommended for consideration as part of the plan in the plan language, which is different from the 2013 functional plan. Ms. Dunn will walk us through a summary of those preliminary decisions in a minute. Today, we'll continue that conversation, look at zoning and land use recommendations for the remaining districts. We will look to the staff recommendations and we'll vote where we can, with the exception of residentially zoned properties abutting University Boulevard and the single-family residential parcels that are non-abutting. We began that conversation in the last work session. We'll return to that after we've reviewed each of the communities to have an understanding of the different approaches that had been floated and suggested by the different council members on the committee, to understand what the implications of those proposals would be, and we'll revisit that as we come back either November 3rd or November 10th, which is a scheduled fourth session should it be needed, and it seems there's a good chance it will, given the depth of the issues that we are going to go into today and as we move forward. This afternoon, we're going to start reviewing some of the transportation recommendations in the plan, beginning with the street designations and classifications. And we're also going to talk about the street grid. And the street grid recommendations are something that we've heard a lot about from residents. We've heard significant concerns about the street grid and the impacts on pedestrian access and safety, especially within residential neighborhoods. So we're going to dig very deeply into those and understand what those recommendations are, what the implications would be, and address those concerns and those policy priorities. And we will make it through as many of the transportation-related recommendations as time permits today. We're not going to go any faster or any slower than would be reasonable and appropriate. We have taken a methodical approach to this master plan. We received it originally in June. It's now October. We have really taken only few votes up to this point, and we're really beginning in substance our work today. Before we dive in, I did want to just address a couple concerns that I've heard. One of it is whether or not this is being rushed. We are going slower than what we normally would in a master plan that has gone through our council process since I have been here and since I have seen even prior to joining the council. We received this on June 12th. We had public hearings, 2 public hearings. Usually there's only one on September 10th and September 16th. And rather than weekly, which is often how the committee would meet on a master plan to get through it in a timely manner, we intentionally set the times once a month so that there would be sufficient time for agency feedback, community feedback, and outreach in between those meetings. And we are going to continue with that effort as we move forward with just the additional meeting at the end on November 10th to be added in addition to those 3 work sessions. So we have not met weekly, and that is by design. We also have heard from quite a number of folks that there's a feeling that this is a fait accompli, that the council is just going to rubber stamp this. I just want to reiterate that we have been listening, that we are listening. We're continuing to listen and are hearing from you, including feedback that I received just this morning with a number of questions and concerns on some of the substance of what we are taking up today. We're going to continue to reflect on that. I think we have demonstrated already that we are willing to make changes and have. The Kent Mill Shopping Center at the outset with the boundary changes and the zoning related changes being one key example to that. And we're going to continue to go through and reflect on best practices, focus on safety of the corridor, on livability, and the opportunities to move forward with our policy priorities to strengthen this heavily utilized corridor where a lot of people currently live and many people work, and we hope more people will be able to work and live as we move forward. So with that, we have, as I mentioned, the executive branch here with Department of Transportation. We will call them up and ask them for clarification as needed. So appreciate them joining us again today and being part of this process from the outset. And with that, unless there are comments, introductory comments from the committee member and district council members, I will turn it over to Ms. Dunn and just want to appreciate and thank council staff for all of the work that both of you have done with the rest of the team on this packet, which is quite a deep dive into some of these substantive issues.
Thank you and good afternoon. We will start in with the staff report again. This is a follow-up or a continuation of the first work session where the committee got into the land use and zoning recommendations by the planning board for the first district, the Amherst Avenue and Chestnut Ridge district, and covered partially the land use zoning, covered all of the land use and zoning recommendations for that neighborhood, the WTOP neighborhood, but had yet to review the urban design recommendations for that neighborhood. So on the first page, second page of the staff report, you'll see there's a very brief summary. We did an overview in the first staff report of the commercial residential neighborhood zone and the University Boulevard overlay zone, just to give some context for what the committee was going to be hearing as we went through the planning board recommendations. Those are summarized at the top of that first page of the staff report. And just as a recap, the committee did make limited decisions. They made decisions on the WTOP neighborhood land use and zoning. There was unanimous approval for 2 recommendations. One was to reconfirm the current zoning for retail properties at 2119 University Boulevard, that being the U.S. Postal Service property and along Amherst Avenue, and also the rezoning that was proposed for the WTOP transmitter property from R90 to a CRT zone, with the details in the staff report. There was also unanimous approval related to Berkeley Court in Westchester. It is currently a PD9 zone, which cannot be reconfirmed after the zoning code rewrite in 2014. Its recommended zoning is also in the staff report. It had a recommended height of 50, and the committee landed on a recommended height of 45 feet for that property. And then the last recommendation related to land use and zoning had to do with the properties that are being proposed to rezone in the blocks along University Boulevard from an R60 or R90, in this neighborhood R90, to a CRN zone with a 1 FAR, 0 commercial, 1 of residential, and a height of 50 feet. And with that, the committee members did each have their own adjustment to what that proposed change ought to be. Chair Friedson recommended that only the R90 zoned properties that abut the University Boulevard be rezoned in such a fashion, and then limited the height to 45 feet. Councilmember Fiane Gonzalez recommended approval of the planning board's proposed zoning change, the same geography, but limited the height from 50 feet to 40 feet. And then Councilmember Jawando recommended that the plan simply reconfirm the existing R90 zoning in the neighborhood. And this is, again, something that the chair mentioned. You will see this recommendation in every neighborhood because it is about the properties that are along the corridor, and this is a corridor plan. So in each place that we have that, as we go through the next 20 pages of the staff report, we're just going to put a pin in that because this is where those recommendations stand for now. And as the chair mentioned, we'll revisit this after going through everything at a future work session date. So with that, the new portion of this plan for the committee to review starts with the urban design recommendations. Those are in the middle of page 3 of the staff report. And what they suggest is redevelopment of this area should explore opportunities for coordinated redevelopment of the WTOP property, integration of recommended BRT station into redevelopment, higher densities and activated building frontages along University Boulevard West and Amherst Avenue, activated privately owned public spaces, an internal street grid that connects to existing public streets, variety of residential unit types, and consolidated parking accessible from the internal streets where possible. And council staff suggest the committee support these urban design recommendations for the WTOP neighborhood.
Any questions from colleagues? Any comments by planning? Okay.
The next was following this, and this was unique to this neighborhood. There were specific urban design recommendations for the future WTOP property should it redevelop. And those are listed in the staff report as well. I won't read all of them. But the main comment here from staff was that the way in which it was phrased in the master plan was that the future development of the WTOP property must, and then it is adhere to these urban design recommendations. And typically we try to use slightly softer language in a master plan. We have used the word must in the past, but we try to stay to things like should. They give a little more flexibility for the planning board who's going to be reviewing development applications as they come in, and they need to apply these recommendations. So the council staff suggests the committee might want to consider replacing just the word must with should in this instance. Okay. The next neighborhood that we'll be reviewing is the Hearthstone Village neighborhood. I'm going to show you slides as we go along. This should be helpful. We're going to put up slides for the prominent properties, and we're going to put up slides that show existing and proposed zoning as we go through each neighborhood. So hopefully that helps the community follow along and helps committee members as they listen. So the Hearthstone Village neighborhood is located south of University Boulevard West, and it's east of Amherst Avenue. It's composed of a range of residential and non-residential developments, office condominiums, religious institutions. Hearthstone is a townhouse community, and Wheaton Forest Local Park. If you'll recall from the tour, one of the religious institutions in this area is the Canaan Christian Church. The church owns the Romeo and Elsie Horad House, which is recommended for listing in the master plan for historic preservation. There is also a synagogue, which has a current preliminary plan approved for 90 new independent senior living units. The land use and zoning recommendation, so this slide you're seeing, this is again just what I've said verbally. These are the highlights of the key properties in this area. And here's a slide that shows in the upper left is the existing zoning, bottom right is proposed zoning. So the first recommendation is to reconfirm the CRN 1.5, C of 0.5, R of 1.5, and a height of 45 feet for the non-residential properties along Amherst Avenue. This is under the CRN zone. This is number 3 on the map. Do you want me to go through all and then have a discussion, or do you want to?
Yeah, you can go through all of it, and then we can open up.
And then decide. Okay. The next recommendation is to simply designate the Romeo and Elsie Horad House in the master plan for historic preservation and encourage adaptive reuse of the building. The third recommendation is to rezone the Canaan Christian Church properties, along with several other that are listed in the staff report, from current R60 zone to the CRN of 1 with a C of 0, R of 1, and a height of 50 feet. That is CRN number 2 on the map. The next recommendation is to rezone the Hearthstone residential community from a PD18 zone to a CRN zone, which is listed in the staff report. And this is because, again, it is a PD zone, which were planned development zones not carried forward in the zoning rewrite. So it must be rezoned. It is CRN number 1 on the map. The next one is to rezone the Hearts is on property from an R60 zone to a CRT of 1.5, C of 0.25, R of 1.25, and a height of 60 feet. And it is the only CRT property you see listed on the map, so the slightly lighter purple color. And then lastly is that recommendation to rezone the residential detached properties from the R60 zone to CRN that we're going to revisit later. Council staff suggests the committee support these land use and zoning recommendations for the Hearthstone Village neighborhood, again, with the exception of the very last one, which will be revisited.
Can we just talk through the last one we're going to revisit? That's what we've been talking about. So this is going to be a theme as we talk through this, that there are different approaches of whether or not we're going to adopt a similar approach, but to the abutting properties, whether or not we're not going to rezone anything. Besides institutional properties, including abutting properties, or whether or not we are going to, with one modest change to the height, we're going to adopt largely the planning board's recommendations with the change to the height. So we're going to try to be consistent on that, but we want to go through neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community to make sure that we understand what that would mean before making a decision on one. So just, I just want everybody to be clear, like there's not going to be any decisions on that today and until the end. But on the other items, I do think we should dig into that a little bit. So can we just, talk through the differences between what's listed as 1 and 2 and 3? We have different CRN density and slightly different heights, and just think it would be helpful to talk through the different properties and the rationale behind those different numbers for that.
Right. So CRN1 on your map is the Hearthstone residential community. So that is a townhouse community with a current zoning, and its recommendation for a CRN of 0.5, no commercial, a residential FAR of 0.5, and a height of 50 is very similar to how the townhouse community was currently approved. So that recommendation isn't different from how it's has a current approval. I don't know if planning wants to add anything to that.
So there's preliminary approval right now without a change to the master plan zoning.
Well, it's built, so yeah, it's a planned development that's built, townhouses.
Right. So I just want to make sure that there's an understanding of what we're doing, what the recommendation is for, what the rationale is, because there is a slight difference between the different properties. I just think fleshing that out here would be helpful for everybody to understand, committee members and the public. So I want to just
Hi.
explain that.
For the record, my name is Jessica McVeary. I'm the planning supervisor for our East County Planning Division. For number 1, the Hearthstone residential community, as Ms. Dunn mentioned, it currently is zoned PD 18, which is a zone that cannot be confirmed through the sectional map amendment. For that reason, staff recommended and the board agreed that we would have a zoning recommendation to basically bring that property into conformance with our current zoning. That's the reason that we recommended the CRN of 0.75 with a commercial value of 0. It is a built community today. There is no commercial that's there, and it's not anticipated to see any development in the life of the plan. So this is really sort of a translation to bring it into conformance with the zoning ordinance today.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted you to say. So that helps. I think that clears that up. So let's move on to 2.
Great. And so CRN2 on the map is being recommended for a handful of properties. A couple of those properties are related to the Canaan Christian Church, and the others border it. If you look on the map that's on the screen, the 2 is on top of the church property, and I believe the property for the Elsie Horad house. But the recommendation for that zoning also extends to those single-family detached homes that border it to the south that you can see there. Those are the ones we're putting a pin in for now. And then as you move along University Boulevard, you'll see that same darker purple with the circle 2 for those 2 areas that are sandwiched between the lighter purple and the yellow. Again, those really fall again into that very last recommendation about single-family detached houses being converted. And so we're not touching that. So that sort of explains two. It's sort of two separate recommendations here, right? It's the one related to the church and the surrounding properties to the church versus the single-family neighborhood properties.
Have we heard anything from the church? Have they indicated an interest in redeveloping other than a church?
Good afternoon. John Laborth, Historic Preservation Division, Montgomery Planning. So the church has been supportive of the Historic Preservation's designation request to list the property on the master plan for historic preservation. At this time, they've given no indication of redevelopment of the property, but they do own both the Horat House and the church property, and so we wanted to, have as much leeway for the church for future development possibilities while preserving that building.
Okay. Any questions, comments? All right. So there's the historic designation question. That's question one. And then there's the zoning question. That's question number two.
Right. And the thing I would add is this, you're going to see a recurring theme throughout this corridor where institutional properties and primarily religious institutions are being recommended for a higher intensity of zoning so that they can take advantage of placing residential on those properties that tend to be somewhat underutilized at this point. A lot of churches have space and have congregations that aren't using the space as much outside, so they can place residential on it. There seems to be a desire from a lot of our residential or religious institutions to do that. In this case, next to the Horat House and the church property, they're very small, so they have been recommended for the CRN at the lower intensity. The other ones you'll see throughout the corridor tend to be in the CRT family of zones with more intense zoning recommendation. This is very low scale for this location.
All right. So this zoning, besides the historic designation, just so we are fully understanding everything that we're doing as we take each decision, it would be to allow either the co-location of essentially townhomes here at, up to 40, 45, 50 feet, below 50 feet, along the property. Or if the church were to ever move, it would allow for that type of redevelopment as well.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate with the exception of, I think, with the designation, we're hoping that it could be more of a kind of co-location capability where the Horat House could remain in place in its environmental setting with the ability for development to happen around that space.
Right. It's two separate questions, though. One is the historic designation. The other is the rezoning.
Yes, but that was sort of our thinking as we were developing the zoning recommendations for the property.
Right. Okay. All right. Any questions? All right. Agree on the historic designation. There's been quite a bit of interest and support for that. So without objection on that, and don't see any concerns with the zoning recommendation here either.
Great. So a 2-0 move forward with the next neighborhood. Okay. The next neighborhood that we'll be reviewing is the Inwood House neighborhood. It's a 62-acre neighborhood located between Wheaton Forest Local Park and Sligo Creek Parkway. There are 3 residential townhouse communities within it, a segment of Sligo Creek Parkway, Glenhaven Elementary School, and of course the Inwood House itself, which is a multifamily residential property for residents with disabilities. There is a BRT station that has been planned at the intersection of Inwood Avenue and University Boulevard. Okay. And on the screen now you can see a slide that shows the key properties for this neighborhood. The Glenhaven Elementary School is in orange. The Inwood House property is sort of the salmon color. The red is Surrey Walk townhouses. There's Weatherstone townhouses. And the purple up at the top, the Palmander Court, is another set of townhouses. Those are the 3 we just mentioned. So the zoning recommendations related to this, the first one is to rezone the Palmander Court property from residential townhouse RT 12.5 zone to CRT 1.5, C of 0.25, R of 1.5, and a height of 60 feet to support the public benefits that are recommended in the plan, but also for redevelopment potential that has been expressed by the Housing Opportunities Commission, who had weighed in on this property. And that is shown as CRT number 1 on the map. Let's go to the zoning map. There we go. Okay, so number 1 on the zoning map under CRT, and it supports HOC potential redevelopment of the property.
Okay, any questions, comments? I don't see any questions,
Okay.
comments on that.
The next one is to rezone the Surrey Walk and the Weatherstone residential townhouse communities from RT10 and RT 12.5 to a townhouse medium density zone. Again, this is because the RT zones are not being reconfirmed under the sectional map amendment. They've been replaced by a townhouse medium density zone that covers both. And those are shown as the paler, the yellowy green that's on the map.
Just confirm, I mean,
Yes.
we confirmed that before. This is, the idea of this is to essentially maintain the current existing zoning, but under the zoning code as it exists today, not as it existed when they were originally zoned. Since those zones
Absolutely
no longer
correct.
exist, similar to the PD 18,
Right.
which doesn't exist either. We have to have zoning that
You have to find a compatible
is
zone that
compatible to
covers
the
what
current
they
zoning
have.
code.
Yep.
Okay, I just think
Not
it's
for
important that we
redevelopment.
clarify very clearly that.
Okay. The next one is the Inwood House property itself at 10921 Inwood Avenue. It's currently R60 zone, and it's being recommended to go to CRT of 1.5, C of 0.25, R of 1.5 with a height of 70 feet. Again, to support redevelopment potential, possibly in the life of this plan. And it's noted as CRT number 2 on the map you have on the screen.
Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Just to, I'm in support, by the way, but I just wanted to highlight the Inwood House. I've been there several times. I was there like a month ago, less than a month ago. Amazing property. The units are huge. People who live there have been there for like 20, 30 years, and that sells a lot. And they're very excited about the possibility of having a BRT station right outside that will create, wider sidewalks, a safer crossing for them. So this is a very important recommendation, and I'm in full support. That's all.
Okay, any comments, questions?
And council staff suggests the committee support the land use and zoning for this neighborhood.
Okay, and just could you reiterate what's the current Inwood zoning?
Currently is zoned R60. It was developed and designed through a special exception, which is how we get sometimes our senior living or our residential for people with disabilities.
And this would essentially reflect the zoning of what is there through special exception and allow for more opportunities to build on that.
Right. The change to a CRT allows for more flexible design standards should it redevelop. It would allow a little more infill if they had space for that, slightly higher height. These are modest changes. It is not a huge change to their zoning. It definitely covers what they have existing today, but allows for some more flexibility should they want to do something to enhance the property in the future.
What's the current height that it has there? And then we're going up to 70 under this recommendation.
Yeah, probably. There is a slight grade change, and I don't know if you brought your copies of the plan, but there's a photo of it on page 39 of your plan. So there is some slight grade change. It looks like it's about 5 stories today.
You can't tell on the screen side.
All right, so it's about 50 feet, but there's a grade change, so it's not 50 feet.
It may feel like 40 to some of
For
the
the whole
neighbors.
property.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I might add is that this is at a planned bus rapid transit station. For that reason, and I'm sure that this will be something that reoccurs as we go through the neighborhoods, we looked to identify opportunities for small amounts of commercial development to be located near the future bus rapid transit stations to further that idea of complete communities, and that you can provide the services, amenities, resources that you need. within a closer distance of your home. And so that's the reason that we included the small amount of commercial at this location. Should the property pursue redevelopment in the future, that they would have that flexibility to provide some kind of small commercial use here. And the 70 feet in height allows you to have sort of a podium construction with residential above.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Any questions, concerns on that? I think there's agreement here, so 2-0 on that one.
Okay. Great. There are also, in this instance, urban design recommendations. The properties around the intersection of Inwood and University have potential, as Ms. McVeary just mentioned, due to the fact that it is a recommended BRT station for the future. And so you'll find those recommendations on pages 5-6 of the staff report. The only comment that council staff would make is, again, the use of the word that said should adhere, which means stick to, maybe just change language to should strive to implement, again, these recommendations. It allows for some flexibility for the board as they review applications that come in before them. One more comment. They also had the last recommendation related to the Glen Haven Elementary School, which was to promote a more compact and street-oriented Glen Haven Elementary School that minimizes surface parking along Inwood. While that is not a bad idea, the school itself was modernized in 2004. It is unlikely it will see anything that changes the construction of that parking lot of the school anytime soon. So it suggests either rewriting that or just eliminating that recommendation.
Does planning have any views on that?
Carrie Sanders for the record, Chief, East County. We find this kind of language helpful when school projects come before the planning board as a mandatory referral. It provides guidance to the staff. So even if it is 10, 15 years from now, it provides us some guidance as to how there may be pedestrian safety issues in this area that we need to address as part of the mandatory referral. So if possible, we would love to keep this language because it does help us as we're going through that review.
And I appreciate where that's coming from. I think the question is, do we want to have language that's just not realistic? 2004, I don't know if you've tuned into the superintendent's dire press conference on the state of the capital budget. A school that was rebuilt in 2004 is not likely to come back. I mean, we have schools that need to be rebuilt a decade ago that, there's a question of whether or not they're going to get renovated anytime soon. So I don't think it's a 10 to 15 year question. I think it's like a 30 to 50 year question, and it might be longer than that because the likelihood is a renovation versus a redevelopment of the school. So I just don't want to set unrealistic expectations in a master plan that we know when we are voting on it and approve it is not going to happen. I think that's what I'm hearing from council staff, of either deleting it or finding a way to include the focus on pedestrian safety without the requirement of redevelopment of the site, because redevelopment of the site in the next 20 to 30 years is highly unlikely.
Could we add, to respond to that concern, Councilmember, could we add sort of a preamble to that sentence to indicate that this does not require the school to be completely rebuilt? Because we do have instances sometimes where the school may be doing a minor addition, or they may be doing some other improvements where the master plan can be helpful to us, even with those minor improvements.
I mean, what would be an example of a...
We do have schools that have additions that come before the board as a mandatory referral.
Well, I understand that, but how would they, sorry to interrupt, how would they adhere to the recommendation within it? I mean, I've never really seen an addition that was done like in the front parking lot. I mean, normally even with trailers and, relocatable classrooms, as I guess the kids are calling it these days, it's generally in the back or the side of...
Many of the parking lots now are actually in front of the schools. So if the school was to be doing some kind of infill, they may be doing it on the surface parking lot in the future. So I hear your point, and I feel like we could simplify this.
In front of the entrance? Like you would go...
At times, we do see where the surface parking lots are that schools need to place items in those parking lots, or they have to redo the surface parking lots. So I think totally hear your point that it's probably in the distant future, but would it be okay if we sort of simplify this sentence so that the intent is there? Because I think our concern is we do have a lot of pedestrian safety issues in this area, particularly by the schools. And every little opportunity that we have to make it safer, we want to try to do that.
100% understand
yeah.
and very sympathetic to that. Here's my suggestion, if it's okay with my committee colleague here. Come up with that language and bring it back to us. We're not, voting this out today or anytime soon, so you have plenty of time. But reflect council staff's concern if you can. I think is a legitimate concern of let's not set unrealistic expectations that a new school is going to be built in the next 10 years. At the same time, we all very much, and certainly recent events have brought this to light more than any of us are comfortable about, the need for pedestrian safety, particularly for our children going to and from school. So if there's a way to reflect language that addresses that, but in a realistic way, that I think is something that we should consider. Does that work? Okay.
Yes, we will work with Ms. Dunn.
So should we move on? Or the committee is in agreement with the rest of the recommendations?
I think so, yes.
The next district we're moving into is the Arcola Avenue district. It is bordered by Sligo Creek Stream Valley Park to the west, Orange Drive to the east, and includes the neighborhoods of University Towers, Brewood Park, and Northwood. Just to note, the first neighborhood that we'll cover is University Towers, but at the first work session, the committee unanimously supported the recommendation to remove the Kent Mill Shopping Center, Kent Mill Urban Park, and the Yeshiva of Greater Washington sites from the plan area. There is quite a bit of text on pages 43 and 44 of the draft plan, and those will be edited accordingly to remove references to those properties, but retain anything relevant that the planning board wants to keep in the plan that's not related to those properties. This neighborhood is centered at the intersection of University Boulevard and Arcola Avenue. It has three significant multifamily residential buildings: University Towers, which is comprised of 2 residential condominium buildings, Warwick Apartments, and Arcola Towers, which is an HOC-owned high-rise residential building for seniors. There's also in this area a synagogue, a swim club, and 2 small residential townhouse communities. Those are all located along with the Autumn Lake Healthcare nursing home along Arcola Avenue. The land use and zoning, hold on, sorry. Not keeping up with the slides. Here is a slide that shows some of those prominent properties. I've added the blue line to show you where the PHP committee recommended modifying the plan boundary, but you can see that still retains the 3 apartment complexes we've mentioned, the 2 townhouse communities, the synagogue, the pool area, and the healthcare community. Okay. The zoning and land use recommendations, the first one is to rezone the University Towers, Warwick Apartments, and the Arcola Tower properties from an RH, which is a residential high-rise zone, to CR2, a C of 0.25, an R of 2, and a height of 200 feet. This is to ensure that the properties remain conforming and to allow for potential infill development. The RH zone cannot be reconfirmed through the sectional map amendment. As we've been speaking earlier today, also like the RT zones and the PD zones, it was not retained in the zoning rewrite. So those high-rise properties needed to find a new zone, and planning proposed this one, which is compatible to what is there today. It's the CR property on the map you've got on the screen, so the very bright pink properties.
All right, so zoning, height, and density compatible with what is currently there today.
Correct. I think the tallest of the apartment complexes is 18 stories, so the 200 feet would be compatible with that.
Okay.
Planning wants to make any comments on it?
Just one additional comment on the CR zoning, which is recommended for University Towers, the Warwick and Arcola towers, the 200 feet in height. The only zone that we have available to us that allows residential at 200 feet in height is the CR zone.
Right, rather than a CRT. Sort of, so it allows more uses, but again, these are developed properties with residential. Currently, there could be mixed infill, could be residential infill, could be small commercial infill.
Doing another zone, in other words, would not allow it to be compatible with what is currently there.
Right.
Okay. All right, without objection.
Okay, the next property is the residential townhouses at Northwoods and at Stonington Woods. These were shown on the map. They're the darker yellowish color. They're at the very bottom of the image. Toward University Boulevard is the smaller of the two, and then just north of the bright pink properties that are being rezoned to CR. And again, these are to be compatible with what's existing today.
Okay, without objection.
The next is the properties, the synagogue properties, the swim club properties, and there's additional townhouse zoning there. These are being recommended for a TMD zone also. This is actually the green that's just north of the bright pink properties. The one I just mentioned before, that was the green at the bottom. So again, consistent. We'll remove all of the land use and zoning recommendations related to the shopping center, to the park property, and to the yeshiva. That leaves one more for the committee to consider, which is the rezoning of the Autumn Lake Healthcare property at Arcola from an R60 zone to a CRT of 1.5, C of 0.5, R of 1.25, and a height of 60 feet. It is CRT number 2 on the map. So that pink over in the corner.
Without objection.
Okay. Let's see. As I already noted, we will remove the recommendations related to the new boundary. There are urban design recommendations for this community as well. The properties around here will be near the planned Arcola Avenue and University Boulevard West Station, and those are listed in the staff report. Council staff didn't have any suggested changes or concerns with that language, although they will be modified slightly to take out any reference again to Camp Mill, to the shopping center, or to redevelopment. And those edits you can see in the staff report.
Okay.
Okay, so you're in agreement with the urban design. Okay. Next is the Brewood Park neighborhood. It has Northwood Presbyterian Church, Good Shepherd Episcopal Church, the McDonald Knowles Early Childhood Center. Those are its key institutional properties. Both of the religious institutions have already expressed interest in redevelopment to housing and religious uses on their properties. All the properties in this area. Oh, you got it. Thank you. Okay. So these are the prominent properties. And there we have the zoning. So all of them are currently in the R60 zone. The plan envisions new residential and non-residential uses on these institutional properties would be a support to the plan's housing goals and would complement the mission of the religious institutions. There are higher building heights recommended for the Northwood Presbyterian property as it is the closest to the planned BRT station near Arcola and University Boulevard. Lower heights are recommended for the other properties. So again, this is reiterated here in the very first land use and zoning recommendation. It says rezone the Northwood Presbyterian property from an R60 zone to CRT of 1.5, C of 0.25, R of 1.5, and a 70-foot height. And that is CRT number 1 on the map. You can see that it is, it borders Sligo Creek Parkway. It is not next to a lot of other residential properties, so the intensity shouldn't be problematic. Are we good?
Okay.
Questions?
Any comments from planning? Okay.
The next recommendation is just to, it's not about zoning, but says to explore mechanisms to transfer the right-of-way at the termini of Brewood Road and Tenbrook Drive to MNC PPC to improve the Northwood Chesapeake Bay Trail alignment and solidify maintenance and management of the trail by parks between Sligo Creek Stream Valley Park and Brewood Neighborhood Park.
Could we just hear from planning on that?
Yeah, I think Zubin Adrinwala, for the record, Montgomery Planning. The recommendation to connect the parks is important because we think of Sligo Creek Parkway, and Sligo Creek indeed came up as a significant resource for the community. And in spite of everything we heard, the praise for the parks was unequivocal. But we also want to make sure that access to the parks is safe and walkable, regardless of where you are in the plan area and in the surrounding neighborhoods. So from our parks colleagues, we got feedback that a connection like this would make this goal more easy to accomplish, especially if down the road we get a BRT and then people can access recreation and not just work through transit and pedestrian access.
Okay. So what would the mechanisms to transfer the right-of-way, what does that mean in plain language to most people?
I think in case of a development, then some of those rights would be transferred over as part of the development process and the regulatory process. So it would be a simple transfer, I assume, but I'll let my more regulatory aware colleagues jump in. But yeah, it would be as part of the development. So there'll be no action till development comes in to play.
I believe another layer here is that some of the some of the right-of-way is owned by DOT, and so there is confusing kind of maintenance responsibilities between DOT and parks on who needs to maintain the area for improved connections. And we do have our parks representatives here as well, if that would be helpful. But this was really intended to try to give parks and DOT the flexibility to negotiate what the mechanisms are to actually, achieve this recommendation, whether that be a transfer, an abandonment, a purchase, sort of to give them the flexibility in the negotiation. I
think to most people, it seems kind of odd that we would need master plan language to get two agencies of government to work with each other. I mean, I don't have an issue with the language per se, but you can understand, a lay person reading this and hearing this and thinking to themselves, is it possible that we need master plan language that happens once every 20 or 30 years to get Department of Transportation and the Parks Department to have a green light to talk to each other and figure out what legal mechanisms, because this doesn't even give a legal mechanism. It just says they should talk to each other. Unless I'm not understanding what the recommendation actually is. I mean, I understand needing to point to conformance in a master plan when you make public policy decisions, because that is the policy of county government. But it seems a little odd to me if our rationale is this would help two agencies within county government talk to each other.
This is also, included in the land use and zoning section because should the Northwood Presbyterian site redevelop, that provides an opportunity for all the parties to come together at the table, including the owner of that property, to be involved in the negotiations around ensuring that there is access and connectivity to ensure that the connections remain between the Sligo Creek Parkway and the Northwood Chesapeake Bay Trail that's just across the street. And so this is sort of a trigger for those types of conversations should the property redevelop in the life of the plan.
All right, that seems a little different of triggering something with a private property owner if and when redevelopment happens. That seems to be more the function of a master plan. So I appreciate that part. I think the first part seemed a little flimsy to me in terms of the need to have master plan language that says that two entities of government would talk to each other. So I think at least that gives a little bit of window, but let's hear from Parks.
Sure. Chuck Hines, Park Planner with Department of Parks. This is a unique situation because the Northwood Chesapeake Bay Trail is on Sligo Creek Stream Valley Parkland, and then it goes through the neighborhood on public rights-of-way, and then it goes through Brewood Neighborhood Park, which is the yellow triangle piece you can see there next to the church. Usually the mechanism for parks to obtain control of land is for us to ask for them to abandon the right-of-way. We're not asking for that here because what would happen is if you abandon the right-of-way, the land goes back to the current landowners. It's no longer public land, it becomes private land. So what we're asking for here is it helps with the negotiations between two public agencies to have the language in the master plan that says this land will remain public, but it doesn't have to be parkland. But we want it to remain public, and we want it the trail to continue through this area in perpetuity. Is that helpful?
It is helpful. I think it would be helpful if the language is a little bit more clear on that, because I don't think the master plan says what you just said. I mean, I think it might be able to be interpreted to achieve what you just said, but I don't think it really says what you just said. So if we could take another look at that and just make sure, note the unique circumstances and explain that in the case of redevelopment. You know, the idea here being this is something that is utilized as a public use. If redevelopment occurs, public use could be taken away. There's an opportunity for public use actually to be expanded and benefited from redevelopment, but we don't make sure that occurs. And without language, that might not occur, which is what you just said. So let's have the language actually say what you want it to do a little bit more directly.
Yes, we can work with Parks to propose some language to Ms. Dunn.
Thank you. Because it's important that we have language in master plan here, particularly in these types of cases, that is clear to planning, it's clear to property owners, and it's clear to the public. And I think sometimes the language is a little too nuanced and technical and a little less just direct. Just say what you want it to say and what you want it to achieve, and let's take a look at that. So if you could work on that language and get back to us, I think that would be helpful here. Thank you for clarifying that, and I think that makes, it's a much stronger argument that we don't want this to revert back to the property owner in the case of redevelopment, based on an abandonment if there is a public need. And so we want to make sure that master plan language reflects that. And let's make the master plan language say that and reflect it. Great.
Thank you. So we'll follow up with that. The next recommendation under land use and zoning is to rezone the Good Shepherd Episcopal Church from the R60 zone to CRT 1.5, C of 0.25, R of 1.5, and a height of 60 feet. This is CRT number 2 on your map, the number 2 on the paler pink. And council staff suggests the committee support this recommendation.
Okay. Any comments here? So this is Good Shepherd Episcopal Church, and the height would be at 60. So realistically, at 0.25 commercial and 1.5 residential on 60 feet, what could be built here?
I think what we're going to ask our urban designer to kind of join us and speak to that. But I think at a high level, it's kind of what Ms. McVeary referenced before. We're trying to give some flexibility for what could occur. We understand that it's the property is going to redevelop. If it does redevelop, it would likely be mostly residential. But I'll have Luis, who kind of looked at these ratios in the zone, to speak a little bit more to that topic.
For the record, Luis Estrada, urban designer with the planning department and the design, placemaking, and policy division. Yes, and typically what we do is that we look for building products when we think about the amount of density and height that we're going to recommend, and a height of 60 feet with a 1.5 overall FAR would typically yield a podium type of configuration with about 3 to 4 stories of residential above it. That's sort of what you get. And it also depends on the size of the property. You know, it's a fairly typical recommendation for the type of product that we're looking for a location like this. So I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Yeah, so podium, just so everybody understands, podium would be. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, podium
What do you
means
say?
that it's the type of construction that we're talking about. That means that you'll have a concrete base that will likely be used for some kind of a commercial use. And then on top of that, you'll have 3 to 4 levels of wood frame residential construction, likely multifamily.
Thanks. Okay. And the idea here is this would support redevelopment, this would support co-location of housing on a surface parking lot, or both?
That is both.
Okay. Thank you. No other questions? Let's continue.
Great. So with that, if the committee is in agreement, we'll move on to the urban design recommendations for this neighborhood, which are in the staff report. Again, they are provided given the idea that they have already got interest from 2 of the larger religious institutions that they plan to redevelop. Those urban design recommendations are listed in the staff report. Staff noted no concern with the language or any of the recommendations, so suggest the committee support them. They are at the page 9. They are the urban design recommendations for the Brewood Park neighborhood.
Okay, without objection.
Okay. Now we'll move along to the Northwood neighborhood. It's the last neighborhood within this district. It's located east of the Northwood Chesapeake Bay Trail and Hannah Street. It includes Forest Knolls neighborhood and several institutional properties as well. Northwood High School, Forest Knolls Elementary School, Luther Rice Memorial Baptist Church, and another synagogue. The Northwood High School, currently under construction, plans to serve 2,700 students upon completion. The first recommendation under land use and zoning is to reconfirm the R60 zoning for the Northwood High School and for Forest Knolls Elementary. The second recommendation is to rezone the Luther Rice Memorial Baptist Church from the R60 zone to CRT of 1.5, C of 0.25, R of 1.5, and a height of 60 feet to promote infill development as well. This is the CRT property that you see on the map, so the lighter pink. And the remaining properties are proposed to be rezoned to CRN.
And that's very similar zoning to what we were just discussing on the other faith-based institutional use.
Correct.
Just to reiterate. So similar concepts apply, similar structures could be built, similar idea of either co-location on a surface parking lot or redevelopment.
Correct. Same zoning.
Okay. And the nodding meant yes. For those who are not watching the nodding, I'm not sure what the video is showing because we have a graphic up on the screen. Any questions on this item from district council member and committee member?
No questions. In support. Thank you for the details.
Great. Okay. Without objection on that.
Okay. We are going to move now into the Dennis Avenue district. Dennis Avenue district extends from Orange Drive and Hannah Street to the west and Lorraine Avenue to the east. It includes Sligo Woods, Mary Center, and the North Four Corners neighborhoods. So 3 neighborhoods here. The first neighborhood that we will cover is Sligo Woods neighborhood. Have that up. The prominent buildings and properties in this neighborhood are the Collins Funeral Home. You'll see that in brown on the map on the screen. A Verizon utility building that's in pink, I believe. And then there are detached residential properties that make up the rest of this neighborhood. The Collins Funeral Home is currently zoned R200, but all the rest of the properties are zoned R60. There's a range of residential developments. There are duplexes and attached units recommended for this area. The plan does note the Verizon property might not redevelop in the long term. And there are existing underground cables on the property, making it unlikely or making redevelopment a challenge. So with that, the first land use and zoning recommendation is to rezone the Collins Funeral Home from the R200 zone to a CRT of 1.5, C of 0.5, R of 1.25, and a height of 60 feet. This is, as I just mentioned, the CRT property on the map, so the pale pink property.
Can we just hear any idea of why this was zoned R200? I mean, it seems odd that this is R200 and the rest of the neighborhood here is R60. I mean, obviously it's not an R200 use, it's a funeral home, which is, you know, a commercial use.
How old?
What?
How old is the property? Do you know? Because all I could imagine is that prior to the R60 zoning, there was R200 zoning, possibly, or when it came in for zoning way back when, and they put R60 down for residential detached properties, the funeral home was already something operating, and realizing that it was a relatively big property in existence, R200 was the zone that fit.
Planning?
I guess the only other thing that I can think of to add to that is based on the lot size, that it's a bigger lot size, and so it reflected the 20,000 square foot instead of the 6,000 square foot lot size.
And how many square feet is that lot?
We can
get back to you on that. We have some of that information. Just give us a moment.
Okay, that would be great. I don't necessarily have a issue with it. It's just, it is a little odd that that's R200 at that corner and the rest of the communities are 60. I mean, oftentimes when there's a different type of use, a school, et cetera, we just, you know, we're talking about that right here. There are 60 if it's R60, there are 90 if the neighborhood's R90, even if there's no expectation that it would ever be subdivided into, you know, that zone, you know, that type of zoning for that type of use. So it just seems interesting.
It might take looking back in the most recent master plan for this property where it got reconfirmed or was zoned. It'd be interesting to see. I don't really know. My guess is it does have to just do with the size of the lot. Okay. But you're right. Usually they leave them as R60. Don't worry about it.
Okay. I don't necessarily have an objection, but if you could get that information, that would be helpful.
Okay. The second recommendation is to rezone the Verizon substation, and there are 4 adjacent properties. You can see them here. So the Verizon property is the larger of the 2 properties in the same block where we were just discussing Collins Funeral Home. It's at the opposite end of that block. So it's the large CRN property on the map. And then there are 4 single-family detached house properties that are in between those 2. So the recommendation in the planning board draft is to rezone these to CRN of 1, C of 0, R of 1, and a height of 50. This is similar to how the other blocks along the corridor are going to be recommended for rezoning those R60, R90 residential properties. So you could split them. You know, in reviewing this one, it was difficult because you also have the recommendation for the whole block of residential detached that's above that block, right? That's the one we're putting a pin in. But those 4 houses that are in between the Verizon and the Collins, well, they kind of fit that as well, although they've been included in this other recommendation. So we can revisit that when you revisit how you want to treat residential properties.
Yeah, I think this should be flagged as one of those
Yep.
circumstances that we should specifically look at, because these are 4 residential properties sandwiched in between 2 parcels. And I just think we're going to, whatever we decide with the 3 different approaches, we're going to have to decide on how to handle that.
Correct. I think that is unique.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to put a pin in the 4 residential properties in this recommendation.
Correct. Yep. Staff will note that. But you are okay with the Verizon substation rezoning. It is unlikely to redevelop.
Yeah. Can we just go through what's the current zoning of that and
R60.
and what is being recommended here? The CRN? And that's, don't all jump up at once.
Yes, it's currently R60 and then rezoning to CRN.
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest on this one that we revisit the Verizon property when we visit these four,
Okay.
because I do think it's hard to make a final decision on the four. You know, if we're looking at this as a unique circumstance, I think we're going to have to look at all of it.
Okay.
And, you know, whether or not the Verizon substation has any realistic chance of redevelopment is relevant here.
Sure.
To a degree. So, yeah, I would suggest we revisit that as a unique circumstance together and that we not make a decision on that today.
Yep, we'll bring that back when we do the follow-up with all of those. We'll note that. Okay, we'll move now on to,
I just wanted to add that the Collins Funeral Home is about 63,000 square feet, the lot. So I guess that was one of the reasons why it went to R200.
This was a lot that you had asked the.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Collins, yeah.
Yep.
So theoretically, under the R200, it could have been subdivided into 3 properties, but
Yes.
no more than 3 properties is the idea. So it's essentially restricting what the subdivision could be. You just don't see a lot of R200 at the corner of a major thoroughfare abutting R60s. R90 is common. We see R90 at major thoroughfare areas quite a bit, but R200 a little less common this far down. Okay, thank you for that. 63,000 square feet. That's helpful. Okay, so we're going to hold off on the Verizon substation along with the 4 residential properties in light of the fact that we're going to have to make a decision on that, and that is a unique circumstance. That isn't a question of residential single-family properties abutting versus
Right.
residential single-family properties behind. This is residential single-family properties that are sandwiched between 2 larger institutional commercial type properties.
correct. Okay, move now to Mary Center neighborhood. It's a 21-acre area. It includes residential detached homes and non-residential buildings, including a Buddhist temple, the Community Health Center, Mary Center, and a Silver Spring Masonic Temple. There are 3 parcels at 400 University Boulevard that are in the EOF zone, and the remaining residential and institutional properties are all zoned R60. There on the screen, you'll see the Mary Center property, the temple shown in pinkish color, and then the Buddhist temple in brown. There are 3 vacant parcels and a detached dwelling at the southwest intersection of University and Dennis. These are under common ownership, and as the plan notes, offer an opportunity to redevelop with primarily residential uses, including attached and multifamily. Mary Center provides county residents with health care, education, and social services. And the plan recommends CRT zone for this property since it permits the existing use and provides more flexibility should the property redevelop. There is a recommendation that the Mary Center property, if it completely redevelops, a new pedestrian or bikeway extension at the Greenock Road to University Boulevard or the extension of Gilmore Drive should be considered. I will note that we will be discussing when we get into the transportation chapter this grid idea, so we'll put a pin in that here. And just to let the committee know, anywhere that a policy decision is made by the committee, we will be consistent throughout in making changes to the plan that you will see in the resolution. So we don't need to come back and revisit it here again. The plan supports the future evaluation of the Buddhist temple for listing as a master plan historic site with the potential for adaptive reuse. But if the temple were to be removed, appropriate redevelopment for the site could include attached units such as duplexes and townhouses. The first land use and zoning recommendation is to rezone the 3 vacant properties that I mentioned previously that are at Dennis Avenue and the detached residential property at University Boulevard. They're all at that corner across from Collins Funeral Home, from the R60 zone to a CRT of 1.5, C of 0.5, R of 1.25, and a height of 50 feet. They are CRT number 1 on the map, which is actually quite large, so they're the properties at the very top of the map, also as symbolized by the CRT1.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about Gilmore. Most of what we've heard about Gilmore is related to the street grid, which I talked about at the outset that we're going to do a deep dive into that. We might have time to start that conversation today. We'll see how this goes. We are trying to go through this as methodically as possible. So as noted, we will get back to that. The street grid question later, but on the broader question on Gilmore Drive, which is what we're focused on here. Any comments from the district council member, Councilmember Mink?
Yeah, I mean, as you note, that this is part of a bigger discussion that we're going to have. But given that it's in the plan here, I just want to make sure that we talk about it here as well. I would like to see the removal of the reference to the extension of Gilmore Drive in this area, noting that yes, it could alleviate some traffic from University Boulevard, but that it would do that by opening up a path through this neighborhood, through this street that children play in, families are in right now, and it would do so with no accompanying funding for pedestrian infrastructure or any kind of guarantee that work would happen there. So it's not. Gilmore Drive is not part of a central business district. We're not looking at downtown Silver Spring. We're not looking at downtown Bethesda. This isn't talking about putting in an entire street grid in this location. This is talking about a single parallel street full of cut-through traffic where there are currently families walking their dogs and kids playing there. And so I would ask that the Gilmore Drive extension be removed.
Appreciate that. As noted, we're not taking up the Gilmore Drive street grid questions on the land use piece. I hear you on that. I've heard from residents. I've spoken quite a bit. You and I have discussed this as well, which I appreciate. I think the balance of safety within residential neighborhoods versus safety on the corridor itself is a really important question. So very sympathetic to that. And I think there's going to be some, I think, alignment here on trying to address these issues. But, I think we're going to just make sure we are taking this up in the right place in the right order. So we're not going to take up the street grid questions until we get to the street grid question and conversation. But the land use question of the zoning itself, we can talk about. So any views on the land use zoning? Obviously, the street grid and the cut through, so to speak. Maybe that's not the term that planning wants me to use, although that's probably the term that the community would use. Is related, but I just wanted to note that. Okay, no objections on the land use recommendation here. Significant concerns about the roadway recommendations, which will have quite a bit of impact for a number of reasons. Okay.
So I read to you the first land use one, which was the 4 properties there at the top, going to CRT. Like I said, they're number 1 on the CRT on the map. 3 of the properties are vacant. There's a detached residential house associated with one of them. They're all commonly owned by one person. So without objection to that?
Without objection.
Okay. The next are 3 parcels at 400 University Boulevard. These are currently in the EOF zone with a height of 60 feet. So the recommendation is, again, to have some zoning consistency, to go to CRT of 1.5, C of 5, R of 1.25, and a height of 50 feet. This makes it consistent with the remaining part of that block. It's those 4 in the middle. And then the third piece of this is like a 3-component piece to CRT number 1 on the map, which is Mary Center itself, getting that CRT of 1.5 zoning and a height of 50 feet.
Without objection.
Okay. And then the last one for this is to rezone the Buddhist temple property from R60 to CRT of 1, C of 0.25, R of 1, and a height of 50 feet. It is CRT number 2 on the map, so a less intense recommendation for that Buddhist temple site of number 2.
Without objection.
Okay, great. We'll move now on to the Northwood Park neighborhood. The Northwood Park neighborhood is located east of University Boulevard West. It is west of Edgewood Avenue, south of Hannes Street, and north of Dennis Avenue. The neighborhood includes detached residential uses primarily. So these are the key properties. You can see they're all residential detached. And here's the recommendation on zoning. And again, it mirrors the 3 separate recommendations from the committee members at the first work session, so we will just move along, because we're going to come back and revisit this later. Okay, so we are now at the North Four Corners neighborhood.
Look, sorry, can we go back? Because I think it's important. We're not making decisions on it, but
Yep,
I think it's important to understand and see the map so everybody can look at it of what
sure.
that would mean. So I just, sorry to stop you, but I just
No,
want to slow
not at
down
all.
for a second. Okay, so just to reiterate, there are 3 different proposals on the residential properties. You can see here in the maps what that would entail, because we've been talking about it high level and theoretically in the first conversation. Part of the idea of going through each neighborhood and each community and each district is to see what that actually would mean on the ground. So I just did want to take a minute. I'm not sure that there are any questions, but I wanted to check to see if they are. I know that we're not taking votes on it, but I do think it's important if there are any questions. We saw the unique circumstances before. The one question that I have, if you look at between Eisner Street and Kerwin, between University Boulevard and Edgewood, the bottom picture, I mean, it's really both pictures, but there are kind of these unique properties in the middle that have flag lots. Can we just talk for a second about what those flag lots are? And
So, yeah, we're not sure what they're kind of vestiges of, but the flag lots represent in some ways unique challenges as well as unique opportunities, because they have driveways on a street, but they don't have frontages on the street. So I think if they do develop, you can use existing driveways, but if there is consolidation, then you can get some lot depth with very few properties being a part of it. So, and also I think they have an opportunity to be kind of part of either side of the community. So, but of course the substantial challenge is that they end up having a driveway on a street on which they don't have frontage. So there are some challenges associated with it. We think that this kind of comprehensive rezoning presents an opportunity to meaningfully address meaningfully sort of take use of the opportunities that these flag lots have. But I think they are kind of vestiges of a past neighborhood planning that carved up lots and did not consolidate access. So I think it's a sort of a historical. It's the equivalent of an appendix in a human body in some ways. It's a vestige of an old evolutionary process.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think if we could, to borrow a term, flag this or pin it or whatever you want to call it, when we take up this question of abutting properties, I think these properties in particular are going to be important for us to hone in and understand, like we did with the Verizon property when we come back and revisit this, because there are implications depending on what we do of what that is going to mean. So if we could flag that. Similarly, it would just be helpful to understand the Dennis Avenue, in the middle of Dennis Avenue of this block between Edgewood and University. There are a couple flag lots there too. That implications could be different, because if we're talking about abutting to University Boulevard, Dennis Avenue, of course, is not abutting. But it would just be helpful to understand what those would mean and what that would reflect. So let's flag those flag lots, and let's come back to it when we come back to the recommendation for this neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We will bring that back.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's continue.
Okay. Now we will move to the North Four Corners neighborhood. This includes North Four Corners residential neighborhood, North Four Corners local park, the Oaks at Four Corners, which is an HOC-owned 121-unit senior multifamily building. And HOC anticipates long-term redevelopment potential for this property. The zoning recommendation here is to rezone the HOC property from the R60 zone to the CRT of 1.5 C of 0.25 R 1.5 H height of 70 feet. This is the CRT property you see on the map, so the slightly paler pink one. It is bordered on two sides by the North Four Corners local park. In addition to the recommendation on zoning, there's a recommendation that redevelopment of the HOC property must provide a financial contribution for park improvements in or near the plan area at the time of redevelopment in lieu of on-site open space. In addition to the contribution, redevelopment should improve conditions to and engage North Four Corners local park. The rationale for this is with a park on both sides of two sides of it, it doesn't need to necessarily provide its own open space. So in lieu of that, can provide a contribution instead. That is something that the planning board would decide. It is also in the zoning ordinance, that allowance. It's an alternative under chapter 59 that would be allowed. And when council staff read it, I went through multiple older master plans trying to see if we had similar language. There was language in the downtown Silver Spring plan regarding something very similar, but it was not in the land use and zoning section. It wasn't even in the park section. It was in the implementation section farther on in the plan. I didn't see it at the time when I wrote the staff report. But it provides language that has to do with optional method development and the ability to do something in lieu of providing on-site open space. Council staff would just suggest maybe we make some slight adjustment to the language here to tie it more closely to sort of that regulatory process, that the board has the ability to provide the flexibility to make a contribution for an off-site improvement for this location.
Could I ask a question about that? Listen, nobody is a bigger believer in parks than I am. There's tie effort here among colleagues. I mentioned the tie here, so I get it. We're all really interested in this, but this is surrounded by parks on two sides, and I'm just wondering if in this particular case, being a little bit more open-ended of what the public benefit is might be helpful, because a property that is surrounded by parks on two sides, it could be that more parks are the biggest benefit because the larger parks have significant benefits to the public, but it could be that the parkland that we have is sufficient and some other public benefit could support the parks, but in a different way with a different type of public benefit use. So I'm just wondering if we should be a little bit more flexible and open-ended here of what that public benefit would be, unless I'm missing something.
I would just be a little careful. This is not so much about a public benefit, a requirement, as it is an open space requirement. So given the size of the property, it would have an open space requirement as a CRT property. And what this is getting at is to say you have a very large park facility that borders the property. Is probably unnecessary to require open space on this site. So what does the board allow?
Yeah, it's
when you
related to
don't
what
have
I'm
to do
saying,
that?
because if you allow for some other public benefit to satisfy requirements.
So it is laid out in chapter 59 what the board can allow as an alternative to open space on site. There's a list in the zoning ordinance for that. And
Right, but the master plan language being so prescriptive, I think is
Right.
the point that you're trying to make.
to direct us to just chapter 59 on alternative, maybe? Is that what you're saying?
That
too?
would be an option, but I think it speaks, I'm trying to add additional context to what your recommendation here is. Let's hear from Parks.
Hi, thank you. Henry Coppola, Parks Long Range Planning Supervisor. I think, Councilmember, you're right, and council staff is, I think, getting at that kind of additional flexibility with the language they were recommending, looking at pointing out that the planning board could exercise their authority to recommend off-site open space improvement, and that could potentially, I think that gives us even a little bit more flexibility. We were looking at directly in that park, and I think I hear you saying, does it have to be right in that park since it's right next to it already? And I think that off-site language in there probably provides us the flexibility that you're driving towards.
Okay, well, I think you're saying we agree, but you're saying something different than what staff is saying, unless I'm missing something. She's saying we should reference chapter 59, which gives further flexibility. You're saying you think it already gives some flexibility. So are you good with the council staff recommendation?
Yes, apologies. I think I made it more confusing than I meant to there. We agree with council staff's recommendation that adds the flexibility that we're all looking for.
Okay, so without objection, council staff recommendation that reference to chapter 59 would incorporate what I was mentioning, that there already is quite a bit of public open space here. So if there's another benefit that, could be provided, off-site, close by, that could provide a greater opportunity.
Okay. We will wordsmith that one slightly and also bring it back to you just so you see it one more time. Okay. Are we good to move forward?
Councilmember Mink.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to check in on the height of 60. That recommendation is, it's a little bit higher, a little bit different from some of the other properties. Now, noting that with the CRT, it's lower than some others also. But I just wanted to, have an opportunity for us to talk about it. It's a unique property. It's a unique opportunity. HOC, they're our partners. They have an interest, and we want to, to give them some leeway to do that. But I just wanted to take a minute to talk about it. Have we heard anything from HOC about what they, any kind of details about what they want to do with that space, what they want to do with that height?
Thank you. So at this time, HOC does not have confirmed plans for what they would like to do with the property. They have indicated, though, that within the life of this plan, they may explore opportunities for the Oaks at Four Corners property, and we're supportive of the zoning. I think that one thing that you'll probably notice as we've been going through, that we generally have tried to have a consistent zoning strategy for HOC-owned properties and for institutional properties, with a CRT zoning recommendation and a height of either 60 or 70 feet, depending on proximity to the bus rapid transit station. For this property in particular, it is located close to the planned bus rapid transit station at Dennis Avenue, and is also bordered by the park on both sides. So we felt as though the 70-foot height recommendation was appropriate here to give HOC flexibility for the development of that property.
Got it. Is there anything about step downs that's a part of this?
Either I or planning staff could mention this. The CRT property, when it borders either anything that is a residential detached zone, which the park would still be, and if it is improved with either residential or an agricultural use, I guess a park probably wouldn't fall under that, but certainly it also borders along the other edge of it. Right. If it borders a residential zone, then there's height compatibility and setback compatibility standards that the zoning code will implement. And so at the setback of the abutting zone, it can only start at the height of the abutting zone, like 35 feet. And it has to, for every height in 1 foot in height it gains, it has to step back another foot. So it's like a 45-degree angular plane to reach 70 feet.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Just one fine point here. I appreciate that clarification. The fine point here, that would be on the back. There is a interesting dynamic on the side here, depending on the decision that we make on those sites.
Mm-hmm. Right,
So-
and actually, to be really clear, I want to make sure that I didn't confuse anyone. On the park properties, while it is zoned R60, it has to be vacant or improved with a residential use. And I am not sure how you treat parkland, because that is not technically vacant and it is not improved with a residential use. So does the height compatibility standard in the code not apply? I would say it doesn't, but can you confirm it for us? So then it only leaves the compatibility standard would be along those detached properties. And then it gets into what Council or Chair Friedson is saying. If those convert to CRN, you don't have height compatibility there either. So,
Although
Yeah.
you would have the the zoning recommendation for those properties that abut the Oaks at Four Corners are CRN with a height of 50. So you would have the height transitioning from 70 on the Oaks at Four Corners property to 50 on the CRN properties. So that would be another form of transition.
And there was, within the compatibility standards, my recollection, a reference to those step up and step backs to those various properties, right?
That is a requirement in the zoning ordinance for the CR, CRT, and CRN properties when they abut a residential zone with specific uses.
But I mean CRN to the CRT. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I was going to say on the parks, check on this. I don't think that I was going to check on it afterwards. I didn't want to say something that I wasn't totally confident, but Farm Women's Market, the whole idea of that is putting multifamily along a major corridor and having a surface parking lot, repurposed with underground parking for a park as part of a master plan recommendation, as I've been working very hard on with many, many others. And there isn't the same level of step back for that. I mean, that would actually infringe upon the goal of maximizing the parkland and allowing the housing to be in as consolidated a space as possible to allow that to happen. So if you could come back to us and confirm that, and if we could understand on this, the flag here would be, what is the step back, if any, based on which of the three options we choose? Because I do think it has an impact, and I think it's one of the unintended consequences of a zoning change here may actually have an impact that people don't want. So I think we should just make sure that we fully appreciate and understand that. And that's the whole reason why we're not voting on these and haven't voted on them and are going through each neighborhood and district, one by one to talk through it.
So I think that's, thank you. And what I'll do when we're creating that list of the ones to bring back, this HOC property will be one of them due to the height. And that way we will combine that conversation with this reevaluation or confirmation of how a park is treated with height compatibility and what it means for the different options and height compatibility here. So we'll bring this back.
Great.
Okay. I think we are moving now forward onto the urban design recommendations for this neighborhood. They're in the staff report listed, and staff read through, didn't have any issues with the wording or any of the provisions, and suggest the council support these urban design recommendations.
Yeah, so to the district Councilmember Mink have anything? You can go first, and I have a follow-up, but go ahead.
On the final bullet point of the urban design recommendations there, relocating the vehicular access from University Boulevard to the intersecting or parallel streets. I have concerns there about unintended side effects of moving those safety issues into the neighborhood where there is significant foot traffic there.
Yeah, and I think in general, I was going to raise the same issue. We're going to have to revisit this depending on what we do with the street grid. So some of these questions are land use questions. Some of them are street grid questions, which we're going to get to next. Some of them intersect because land use and transportation do not happen in a mutually exclusive way. So that is definitely something that we need to flag. So I appreciate you raising that, because I don't want to go too in-depth here, because let's make sure we are moving forward with the street grid recommendations, and let's come back to that. But I do think we need to flag it and then come back based on any changes that we may or may not make to the street grid recommendations, if that works for you.
Yeah, that we can, as long as we're going to come back to these. So, but I'll just note that if and when redevelopment happens, the conversations around these will still come up. Planning can still negotiate for the changes. State Highway can still making these changes even without redevelopment taking place. So I know we're coming back to this, but I will just note that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, this speaks to what is going to be a fundamental conversation related to the street grid. And there is this question of how much do you want to move off of University Boulevard? What is the impact if you're moving, cars off of University Boulevard? Does that impact the neighborhood? What impact does that have on the neighborhood? Are you trading one safety issue for another safety issue? I mean, these are the very real day-to-day conversations that we need to have that impact people and families and communities. So, this, I think, speaks, to the core of that question and conversation. And then there's also, the new development, building heights transitioning, the second bullet. We're going to have to revisit that too, depending on what we decide based on our prior conversation. So I did just want to flag that as well, and make sure that we revisit that specific bullet point, because depending on what we do with the neighborhood zoning decision, that will impact what that language should say to reflect that point.
Absolutely. I will just inform the committee. I will make sure that we go back through every recommendation as we start to have confirmed recommendations from the committee that impact any of these other recommendations. We will wordsmith and bring back and have drafts for you of those changes. We'll double check everything.
Great. Okay. Does that satisfy committee member and district council members? Okay, great.
Okay, we're going to move
all
on.
right. So we are going to put a pin in both of those, flag those for future discussion, since we have some significant policy conversations that we need to have related to them. Okay. Other than that, we have urban design recommendations. Are there any other objections, concerns, comments, or questions? Okay, I don't see any, so without objection,
The rest.
on the others.
Great. Thank you. We are now moving to the Four Corners District. It's the last district. I'm probably going to spend a little more time here. Four Corners serves as the commercial center of the intersection of University Boulevard and Colesville Road. As most of you know, there's a McDonald's, Papa John's Pizza, 7-Eleven convenience store, Four Corners Pub, and a Shell gas station. There's also the Woodmore Shopping Center, very popular, and many people know about it. The Four Corners District extends between Lorraine Avenue and the Capitol Beltway. It includes the the Four Corners West, Four Corners North, as well as the Woodmore Shopping Center and Blair High School neighborhoods. The first one we're going to cover is the Four Corners West neighborhood. It's on the screen for you. The notable properties here are a Safeway grocery store, a U.S. Postal Service property, 2 gas stations, a small office park. The commercial properties in this area are CRT and CRN today. There are detached residential properties in this neighborhood as well. They are zoned R60. And we'll turn to the land use and zoning recommendations. They are starting on page 13 and going to page 14 of the staff report. They list them all out. There are quite a few. And council staff has recommendations on some of these, and so it's somewhat broken up. The ones of the 8 that are listed, council staff, the first, or 3 of them, council staff recommends the committee support. So the first one is rezone the commercial properties, starting at 2 University Boulevard West. Go through that list. It is in the median of University Boulevard West, so between the eastbound and westbound lanes of University Boulevard, west of Colesville Road. And the recommendation is to rezone that from a CRT of 2.5, 1.5C, R of 0.75, and a height of 45 feet to CRT of 2.5, C of 1.5, R of 1.5, and a height of 75 feet. And that is CRT number 1 on the map, in the middle. So the lighter pink in the middle, the median properties. And council staff suggests the committee support that change.
Councilman Mink.
That median property, we've heard a lot of concerns from folks about going too high there, and including with the 75. So, I mean, I know that there's recommendations coming for the properties on the side of going to 60 feet. That would have consistency there, but just wanted to open that up for discussion. It's a very it's a narrow median. There's a lot of There's traffic concerns, foot traffic and vehicular traffic concerns related to, increasing the density too much there.
So 30 foot, if I'm not mistaken, a 30-foot increase in
Right.
height there.
Correct.
So just to put a fine point on that.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a recommendation or a request as the district council member?
Well, I'll note that a 60-foot would put it more consistent with some of the recommendations that are coming up for the area. Yeah.
So 60 instead of 75. Could we hear from planning on that, of what 60 versus 75 would mean?
Sure. Thank you. I think I want to start, if it's okay, by talking a little bit about what we were thinking about for the land use vision of this area. This, as you know, is a major commercial center in this area, and we were thinking about it also from the perspective of the two bus rapid transit lines converging here with Colesville Road and University Boulevard. We were striving to provide zoning that would allow for this to continue to be a commercial center, but also allow residential development to happen above. And sort of going back to the earlier conversations that we had around what that means from a style of development perspective, we were thinking that that would mean a concrete base that would accommodate retail uses with wood frame construction above. The rationale for the 75-foot height is to allow both that concrete base, that podium, and then to have a sufficient number of stories above that, 5 to 6 stories of residential construction, to really leverage the ability for development to happen here in a mixed-use fashion that is located in close proximity to two bus rapid transit lines.
Yeah, can I just talk in here, already here as chair of the planning board, when staff, this is not just for this, but some of the others we're going to talk about, like the Safeway site. Staff originally came to the board, like on the Safeway with a 60-foot height, and we pushed them to go higher. And then that's why in some of these sites around here you saw 100. But let me just say this. For a developer to build stick build, today the standard is 5 foot of stick over a concrete podium, sometimes a two-level concrete podium, but typically why they want to move to the 5 feet of stick building. The 5 feet stick build, they're typically 11 foot floor to floor, right? And so that's to go to 5 feet. 5 stories is 55 feet, and then you have a concrete podium, and generally it's about 18 feet because you want to have that as a commercial space. So that's why if you add all those together, you get about 73. And so at a minimum, we want this and some of the others to be 75, especially at this, this critical mass location, Colesville and University. So that's why staff had put 75 feet here, and we think it shouldn't be at this corner, shouldn't be any lower than that. But I'm just giving you the rationale why we came up with 75. The first, like an 18-foot podium for the commercial piece on the first floor, and then 5 stories of stick built above it. Okay.
Councilor Mink.
So I hear all that, and also a lot of the concerns from the community, which I think are valid, stem from the fact that we don't have, we're pretty far away from having funding and any kind of guarantee in place for a lot of the pieces that this working hinges on. BRT, phase 2 on Route 29, much less University Boulevard, thinking about pedestrian safety infrastructure, all of this is related. There are pedestrian safety improvements that we have been asking for from State Highway in this area that was approved by State Highway 2 years ago, and we still can't get a definitive timeline on it. So, which is a funding issue, but that funding issue relates to this entire conversation is only going to be getting worse. So, I think my concern for a lot of these is applicable here, where there's a vision, but there are realities on the ground, and I have concerns about putting the cart before the horse here, and the result being potential unintended consequences if we think about doing a development like this on that area without some of these key pieces, it's not gonna work, and it's definitely gonna have some unintended side effects. So so that I hear you, and also without some of these pieces, I still have significant concerns.
If it goes to 60 feet instead of 75, I mean, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that, you know, a medium-rise redevelopment here, which is among the more desirable multifamily, you know, stick over podium, as we were talking about earlier, you believe needs 75 feet to be realistic to happen.
Yeah.
So if it's not 75 feet, if it's 60 feet, is it that no redevelopment happens and that's your concern? Is it that the redevelopment that happens is a less desirable land use, and what would that be? Is this realistically a place where townhomes get built? Because, you know, I mean, that's what we're talking. Is it redevelopment, and redevelopment is impossible or isn't likely given a reduction, or is it a less desirable outcome for redevelopment that occurs? Because right now what's happening in places where are zoned much higher heights, much greater density because of some things that we've put in place here at the council, some regulatory dynamics that we do control, some fiscal realities that we don't control, and economic realities, construction costs, labor costs, et cetera. Townhomes are being built. I mean, that is the most common, land use pattern, even if multifamily is permitted or some, much higher density. So I'm just trying to understand the concern of what the options are, the outcome. And Mr. Chair, if you could respond, and then we'll turn back to council staff.
So I think a lot of times in these master plans, we talk about flexibility, right? And also it depends on the economic climate at that time. So there could be a time where, if interest rates go really low, construction costs, I don't think they're ever going to go down, but they just don't go up as much. Maybe there's an opportunity to do a 60-foot tall multifamily building with one, but I just think to set the limit, it may be built less than that, but I wouldn't want to have the limit so that it wouldn't provide the flexibility if the market conditions are right. And just like now, some are doing towns in a place where they could have done stick, but the market isn't right there. But I think the market will turn around again so that they can do so. So it's providing more flexibility. Would they build a 60-foot? Maybe they would. But I'm just saying to provide that flexibility based on what we have seen in the past. And we can give some more examples of properties that have gone to the 65, 75 feet recently. Maybe.
Yes, I can do that, Carrie Sanders, for the record. So we did look at a few properties to compare, and we found that typically they're going to be between 65 feet and 75 feet for that kind of condition that we have here. So we looked at areas outside of metro stations. We looked at areas kind of along larger roads like this. One example is 4010 Randolph, which is in the Beers Mill corridor master plan. That has a height of 65 feet in the zone. And we also looked at another example of residence at Forest Glen on Georgia Avenue. That has a height of 70 feet in the zone. And then we looked at a different project, which is called Lowman's Plaza, which is outside of the White Flint area along Randolph Road. That has a height of 75 feet, and that has a unique townhouse product. The other examples were multifamily. This is a unique townhouse product where it's like a townhouse that has back-to-back units. So it's one townhouse with back-to-back within it. So it's a bit taller of a product. But yeah, I think to Mr. Artie Harris's point there, some of the properties within the Four Corners area are a little bit deeper. So for example, the Safeway property has a lot of depth. So if the committee was going to look like property by property, I would encourage you to look at that property specifically because it have more depth. So it is a different shape and could potentially be more advantageous for a multifamily building. And I would also encourage some other properties kind of as we go through to look at the depth of the property because I think that is a helpful metric.
When you say look at the, I'm just trying to understand what that means.
So with the property,
I understand what looking
yeah,
at the
the
depth
lot,
means, but to what end? Look at the depth
yeah.
vis-a-vis the median. There's two different types of properties. One's in the median. One is a deeper property that abuts the neighborhood. I mean, interestingly, there's more sensitivity generally to properties that abut neighborhoods, single-family neighborhoods in particular, in terms of their height, than ones that are farther away from the neighborhoods because, you know, for obvious reasons, they're farther away. The farther something is away, the smaller it looks. The closer it is, the bigger it appears, and the bigger it seems, and the more impact that it has. But when you say focus on the depth, what do you mean?
I just mean that it kind of accomplishes two things. It allows the property to like step down as it gets that abutting. So the example up here with the number 2, that property would have to step down as it meets the yellow area, which is the residential. So it would have to go down to that 35 feet and meet an angular plane of requirement to the zone as well. But to answer your question more directly, if the property is more deep, it allows for more things like, for example, open space or transition areas or a larger building. So,
right. So just to clarify, you're saying in the median,
there's less
give
space.
more flexibility with the height because there's less flexibility on a site constrained by, you know, it being more challenging, and therefore you want to, in order to be able to maximize uses, public benefits, pedestrian access, other things, that having additional height allow more things to be possible. Whereas a deeper site, you can not have as much height sometimes because you have more of a site to work with, essentially. Is that, I mean, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
What I was
mentioning.
So
you're saying that, okay, go ahead.
So the deeper the lot, the more ability to have some flexibility there. And when I say flexibility, I mean to potentially have a multifamily building in that lot is greater with a deeper lot. With these shallow and also sort of oddly shaped in the median, that's going to be a difficult site. So I think I would deprioritize the height in that location where the number 1 is, because it is going to be a difficult site. You're going to have a lot of maneuvering to occur as well to like get to the site. So
you're suggesting going to 60 or 65 would be okay here?
Correct.
But and you would not want to do that in the deeper sites?
Correct.
Okay, got it. I wasn't anticipate you contradicting your recommendation, but I appreciate the clarification and understand the points. I apologize for misunderstanding at first. Let me turn it to Ms. Dunn, and then we turn it back to Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
I was just thinking that we should lower it to 65. Right?
Does that work?
65. Is that okay? Instead
I
of
mean,
75.
it's better than 75.
Yeah. I mean, they mentioned 65, so.
More, I mean,
So,
okay, sorry.
And one thing, thank you. One thing you could note, there are several illustrations throughout this plan of what corridor growth looks like, and many show a podium with 4 stories above it, 2 stories above it. The ones at Dennis are lower scale. The ones on page 21, you know, might be getting more at this most intensive area of the whole plan, which is at Colesville and University. Again, they aren't huge buildings. We're not talking downtown Silver Spring, but if it's a podium of 18 with 4 stories above it, which is only 1 story less than the ultimate 5, but it's shown here in an illustration as 4 stories above.
So that's 62 feet.
That's 62 feet, exactly.
All right, so 65, does that work? That it seems to be a middle ground? Yeah. All right, the district council member will take it. I don't think she was on microphone, but that's what I heard. Okay, thank you for fleshing that out. I think this was a very helpful. I understand now what planning staff was suggesting, that this is already site constrained, and so there are fewer options here anyway. There's one view of that, of maximize the height as much as possible there so that you give more options. There's another view to say realistically there's only so much you can get out of this. So I think 65 is a reasonable point. It still allows you that. And the benefit of the podium is you end up with a better product. You either can get commercial on the ground floor, which could be a community serving retail use of some form or fashion, or you could get a nice inviting lobby. You could, I mean, there's just a lot of better things that you can get out of, you know, an 18-foot, give or take, concrete structure with stick on top. I mean, it's a better product generally, what you can get. So that flexibility, I really appreciate the chair raising, and I think we're landing in a good place there. So why don't we adjust that on the medium property to 65 feet from 75 feet, and that's splitting the difference between the 30-foot increase to a lower standard.
Great. Okay, thank you. The next two are in this area are rezoning the Four Corners Office Park property from an R60 and a CRN of 0.5, C of 0.5, R of 0.25 with a height of 35 feet to a CRN zone of 0.5, both total commercial residential and a height of 40 feet. This is CRN number 1 on the map. And next to it, it's all one color, is the property at 10,000 Colesville Road, going from R60 to the same CRN of total commercial and residential of 0.5 and a height of 40 feet. And council staff suggests the committee support that intensity and modest change.
Any comments or questions?
Sorry, we're on the this is the Safeway program?
No, we are on CRN number 1. It's the dark purple one that is along Colesville Road.
This is the Colesville property. Let's just give a minute. We're not in a rush here. We're going to take our time, make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. Not in a rush. Okay. No concerns or questions? Okay. No objection or concerns there.
Great.
Sorry, everybody, just to be clear, everyone's working very hard here. We're cross-referencing our University Quarter plan here with what's up on the screen with the staff packet. We're not in a rush. We're methodically making it through, but there are no questions on that.
Okay, so now we will move to the Safeway Shopping Center property. This is at 116 University Boulevard West. The request is to rezone it from R60 and CRT of 1.5, C1.5, R of 0.5, and a height of 45 feet. So today, that if you look at the top one where it's existing zoning, you'll see a 2. That's the Safeway building itself is zoned CRT. But the parking lot, the large yellow box next to it, is the R60 parking lot. That's not uncommon. Old master plans used to zone the commercial properties in a commercial zone and leave the parking in a residential zone so that the size of the commercial building could not increase. It was typically done on edges of neighborhoods. As you can see, this is the edge of a neighborhood. So the recommendation here is to make it one consistent zone for the whole property. That is now the 3 under CRT that you see in the proposed zoning image at the bottom. And that would go to, the recommendation is a CRT of 3, C of 1.5, R of 2.5, and a height of 100 feet. The council staff went back and also looked at the public hearing draft to see if it was different than the planning board draft. And as Chair Harris has mentioned, yes, in fact, the board did increase some intensities in both density and height for some of the properties through this district, this being one of them. And so council staff had suggested a CRT of 2.25, the commercial's 1.5, residential's 1.5, and a height of 60 feet. And so I'll let the committee.
Yeah, I've gone through
that
very carefully with these recommendations between the public hearing draft, which is essentially the planning staff recommendation, the planning board draft, and now the staff recommendations. And I just, I think it's important that we flesh that out. If we can talk through that a little bit, but it seems to me here the staff recommendation from planning staff is similar to the public hearing draft recommendation, and I have council staff itching to get in a word, so I will yield to her.
One more thing to note, which is because this has become relevant in the conversations we've been having today, less so than I knew when I started this. The number 2 in the darker purple on the lower image are residential properties that would fall under the, do we rezone the abutting properties? Do we rezone all, any of the, properties within the block? So they're similar to your question, Mark, about the ones that were between the Verizon site and the Collins Funeral Home. You have just these three. They border the Safeway property, but they are also abutting another detached home. They are across the street from other detached homes. They do not abut University Boulevard. So I just wanted to raise that in the map. For proposed zoning, it looks like they are CRN, like they're a mixed-use zone. They could be. They could be retained residential depending on what you do. And so just to keep that in mind when you look at the Safeway site.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think let's flag those darker purple number 2 on figures 48 and 49. I think we can also flag the lighter purple number 2. There's that flag lot there that's kind of
It's currently commercial.
interesting.
Yeah, that's the post office property, actually.
I was going to ask if that was
Yeah.
the post office. Okay,
Yeah.
so that answers that. Okay. All right, let's go we can go to the planning board chair first out of deference to explain the change, because there was a fairly significant change between the public hearing draft and the planning board recommendation, and then you would like to hear from the planning staff as well.
Yeah, so let me, we feel, the board felt that it should be higher than 60 feet tall, and, but I know it's sensitive to the community, so I just think it should be higher. It doesn't have to be 100, but I think given what we talked about just previously, it should be higher than 60 to give more flexibility to the developers in this area where this is the heart of that intersection. And so whether it's 70 or what, it doesn't have to be 100 given the sensitivity, but I believe it should be more, especially the Safeway site, should be more than 60 feet tall.
We understand the concerns of the community, particularly the folks that have testified in the public hearings. And as Chair Harris mentioned, there is sensitivity here too. It's a unique situation with the number 2, as you see on the screen, that's sort of the darker purple next to the pink. And that's challenging. That being said, I think based on the precedents that we looked at and the depth of the lot, I would also recommend something greater than 60 feet, given the information that we've shared today. So if you'd be willing to consider 70 or 75, I think that would be helpful to moving this forward. As a note, with the other properties that we discussed earlier in the day, when we went along the corridor, when we had properties roughly this size, I think we were getting closer to that 70 feet. So we have precedent for that kind of throughout the corridor, because that's typically the height that these things are being built. The other thing to consider to address the community concerns is we could have language in the plan that specifically talks about a better transition of height or more restrictions if this property was to come forward with any kind of site plan. So that's something that the committee may want to consider, because at site plan we can add more restrictions that are that are on top of the zoning. So if that's a way to bridge maybe some of the concerns, that's something to think about as well.
Okay, but originally you recommended 60 feet.
We did, and I think full transparency, we got comments about that. Our board members had good discussions about that. So I think we acknowledged that 60 wasn't the right number, and so it was changed throughout the process. And we acknowledge that that's okay. I think we're comfortable with a higher height than 60 feet here.
Okay, in light of that, council staff, just any thoughts on the recommendation, and then I'll turn it to colleagues.
So, yes, the conversation today has been extremely educational. What I would note is the other 2 properties so far that I can see quickly that we've talked about a 70-foot height have been the Northwood Presbyterian property that was very isolated. The other is the HOC property, and we put a flag in that. Those are the other 2 at 70. Otherwise, they have been 60 or 50 along the very, what we think of as the more residentially mixed occasional commercial area of University Boulevard. Here we are in the much more commercial area. We just had an interesting conversation about 62 feet being maybe the minimum and bumping it to 65. So, council staff would change her recommendation to 65, but given the location of this This property next to the neighborhood, I wouldn't go above that.
Colleagues, Councilmember Mink.
I mean, acknowledging that this is going to be an area that we return to in light of the future conversations decisions to be made about the R60, R90, and we've got a couple of special properties next to it. But I was prepared to suggest that we go with the 60 foot. I'm hearing the conversation, and I understand if you all land on 65. Maybe we can discuss if we can add language in this plan, like Carrie suggested, then that would be something that could help us kind of navigate this.
Yeah, I think 65 makes sense. I would be open to going to 70 if there was transition language. But I think, going above that doesn't seem compelling to me at this point. So I'll yield to my colleague here, and we could open it up to what that language would be if we went to 70 feet. In terms of the transition and what the practical impact would be, I'd be open to looking at both of those options. But ultimately, if it gives some additional flexibility and there's step back language, if going to 70 makes a material difference, I'm open to that, but I think the transition makes a big difference.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think as you come back, focus on the transition, and I would say see both scenarios, 65 and up to 70, and see if it's really a big difference. If not, it should be kept at 65 with a transition language.
I will note for the committee's consideration that in the urban design recommendations associated with this neighborhood, we do have language, it's the second bullet on page 66, that states concentrate taller buildings toward University Boulevard and lower building heights toward existing detached residential properties.
All right, well, let's get a little meat on the bone of that. That seems pretty high level. We could use a little bit more specificity, I think, for folks to understand what that means of, what the step back is. So, there is a 1-to-1 ratio, as we heard from council staff earlier. Let's talk through on this exact site what that would mean if we just kept the language as it is. And let's talk about if we strengthen the language as was offered up by planning staff, what that language could be and what the impact would be based on that. And then I think we're in a narrow band here. We're between 65 and 70 feet is the agreement, it seems. And there's a question of whether or not there's additional language we can provide to strengthen that transition. And if there is, I think there might be an appetite to go to 70, but ultimately 65 without it. That's what I'm hearing, if that's what colleagues are saying. Okay. All right. We have a general recommendation on that, but we are going to come back with formal language before we actually come to a formal agreement on it.
Thank you. Yes, I have taken notes. So now we're going to move. You have the map in front of you. We're looking at the pink one, the number 2 that we were talking about just a second ago. There are 3 properties there. You have the U.S. Postal Service property, you have a BP gas station, and you have a Shell gas station. So the smallest one, closest to the 2, is the BP gas station, then the post office is in the middle, and then you have a Shell gas station at the corner. Let's see, the recommendation from the planning board is for a CRT of 2.5, C of 1.5, R of 1.5, and a height of 75 feet. I believe for all of these 3 or properties, because this is one zoning block. And then council staff had suggested a change to 60 feet. And I will turn it back to you to see.
Yes.
Okay. Any major concerns here? All right. Not fighting hard for this one, given the circumstances of the property and the dynamics. So we'll, without objection, accept the council staff recommendation to lower the height on this to 60 feet. And that is consistent with the planning staff
with the public
original.
hearing draft.
Public hearing draft.
So I think we do have a question here or a concern, I guess, which would be between the public hearing draft and the planning board draft, there was a work session 4 where what planning staff had tried to do, and which is that we wanted consistency across heights when CRT properties shared a boundary with each other. So I think what we would really like to see is if 3 becomes 65 or 70, then number 2 also becomes 65 or 70. In the event that there's a partnership or there's some ability to come together and build something, then the height transition or height discrepancy between abutting properties, especially when they're from the same zone family, might create some limitations. So I think we would say that if you're going to go with 65 on number 3, then we would request you to try and do the same for number 2. That way we can have consistent heights across what could become one parcel eventually.
I don't mean this to be combative, but did you raise the same concern to the planning board when they recommended 75 for this site and 100 for the other site? Because that would contradict what you're asking us to do.
We did in the work session 4, which is sort of a point in time now. We had the recommendation of making it blanket 75. So
in the public hearing draft. At 60
it was
feet.
in one of the work session 4s. In one of the work sessions, so midway through, and I'm getting deja vu because I've had this conversation several times. But yeah, we were trying to do consistent heights across. But no, your point is absolutely spot on, which is, yeah, we did kind of deviate from that recommendation with the 100 feet.
So not an existential issue, a soft recommendation, if that's fair?
No, I'm not going to let
Okay.
perfect be enemy of the good in any
Sure.
situation, but this would be pretty
Sure.
nice to have that. If you go with 65, then...
I understand the
yeah.
point. I just wanted to note that we have before us a recommendation from the planning board.
Yeah.
You know, y'all work together. That says that it's not consistent. So I think it's important that we, call out the obvious. That's
I guess I'm saying don't make the mistakes we made.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Again, I just wanted to raise that point. Okay. Any views on that?
I mean, I think that the 60 feet is appropriate there, and to your point, there wasn't an issue with the consistency previously, at least not enough to make that adjustment previously. And so, they are smaller properties, and I hear you, in terms of the depth there. I hear you about, opportunities to build across sites as well. But I think that the 60 foot on those properties is a good compromise. So that's what I would ask.
Okay, we're going to just stick with the council staff recommendation. We're going to repeat your same mistakes and go with a lower height number, but appreciate the advocacy. With that, let's continue.
Okay, thank you. We are moving into the Four Corners North neighborhood. Have it on the screen for you. It's located east of University Boulevard West between Lorraine Avenue and Timberwood Avenue, northeast of Colesville Road. It's 12 acres in size. It is consists of primarily commercial businesses and detached residential properties. There are 2 gas stations there as well, Citgo and Shell. There's a Pepco substation, Dunkin' Donuts, Four Corners Pub. There is an existing Flash BRT station located along the northeastern frontage of Colesville Road, adjacent to the southbound travel lanes. All right, the board provides 6 recommendations on land use and zoning. And similar to the conversation we've just had, council staff went through. She also looked at the public hearing draft, looked at consistency across the different properties, which was stated as a high-level goal. Looking at CRT number 4 on the map, if you look at the bottom map, you look at CRT 4, so the lighter color pink, and the 4 is at the corner of Colesville and University. And the planning board, it is currently zoned, some R60 there, I think just that little bit of parking. and a CRT of 2.5, C of 1.5, R of 0.75 with a 45-foot height. And the planning board on this site recommended a CRT of 3, a C of 1.5, R of 2.5, and a height of 100 feet. And for this one, council staff had recommended a change to CRT 2.5, C of 1.5, R of 1.5, and a height of 70 feet.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a discrepancy on the height dynamics here. So if we could just talk about the rationale behind that and talk through that, that would be helpful.
And so when you say there's a discrepancy, you mean between the public hearing draft, the planning board draft, and what's before you? Or could you clarify the discrepancy, please?
Let me turn it to Councilmember Ming.
Yeah, some of these upcoming recommendations here across these next few bullet points have a mix of height recommendations, 60 or 70. If you could just talk about the rationale for each of those.
I can be, but 70 was what was also recommended in the public hearing draft. So the staff came up with 70 and it was changed to 100 at the board.
Sure. And as Mr. Adrian Valla mentioned, in the public hearing draft, there were recommendations generally for 60 feet in building height, with the exception of, in this block, there was a height of 100 feet. With the properties that are currently zoned EOF, and they're shown in green in the figure on the left side of the screen. As we were preparing for work sessions with the planning board, we realized that there was a lot of inconsistency in the height recommendations in this area. So through the work sessions with the planning board, staff revised our recommendations to go from 60 feet to 75 feet. Generally across the board, to try to accommodate that podium ground floor with stick construction above. And then as the board was having their discussions through the work sessions, in a site-by-site manner, very similar to the conversation that the committee is having, they identified specific sites to increase that height from 75 feet to 100 feet. And I believe that number 4 was one of those locations. And I believe that number 1 on the figure on the right was also one of those locations. That is a property that has a 100
Yeah,
foot.
sorry, can you just explain, if people are watching, which number 1 you're talking about? There's
Sorry.
3 number 1s on this chart, which
Okay,
for
so
future, it
in
would be
the-
helpful to have like 1A, 1B, and 1C, just for clarification purposes, because I think it's very difficult to talk about and follow. So just for future, you know, and the purples are pretty close for those who are somewhat, even modestly visually impaired. I mean, I happen to be able to tell the difference, but for some, I think it's difficult. So just friendly suggestion for future. Didn't mean to interrupt, but if you could
Sure.
be explicitly clear of exactly which number 1 you're talking about, exactly what figure you're talking about, as people try to follow.
Sure, thank you for that reminder. Figure 51 is shown on the left side of this screen. That is the existing zoning. Figure 52 is shown on the lower right part of the screen. That is the planning board draft recommended zoning. In figure 51 on the left, the properties that are highlighted in green that are currently zoned employment office have a maximum height today of 100 feet. In the planning board draft, that maximum height of 100 feet was carried forward, and that is reflected in the number 1 that is shown in the lower right figure on the screen. The planning board also carried forward the 100-foot height for what is shown as number 2 in the lower right figure. Transitioned to 75 feet for number 3 because of the size of that property. I think that and I would ask Chair Harris to to correct me here if I'm incorrect, but I think that the rationale for that was based on the size of that property and what could be accommodated there. And then number 4, the 100 feet height was also carried forward, number 4 in the lower right figure on the screen.
Okay. Can we identify the properties that you're talking about, number 1 and number 2? Because I do think that it's a little bit difficult for folks to be following, and I'm hearing some concerns about that, which I understand, between what's in the packet for the conversation and what's in the chart that we're referencing. So in the packet, we're referencing sites by their names, and in the chart, we're referencing them by numbers, and the numbers have 2 numbers that are the same number with a very slightly variation of a magenta to a violet purple. So if we could just be like very explicit of, here's the property that we're talking about. Here is what the planning board recommended. Here's what the public hearing draft suggested, and here's what council staff is recommending. And then we're going to discuss it.
Thank you for that question. So page 66 of the plan, I think, is a good place for folks that might be following along to look. That's figure 50, and it shows key properties in the Four Corners North neighborhood. And I think that kind of also has a key, okay, excuse me. That has a key that's associated with it that also shows you the names of the businesses. I think Ms. McVeary has walked through, and apologies for the colors, the pink and the purple, although I do love the color pink. I understand that having them next to each other is difficult.
It doesn't print pink. I mean, just to be clear, it's not pink. It's like magenta.
I hear you. Yes.
It's like a different color of purple. It's 2 purples.
I understand. And that, I'm really glad you brought that up. We will not do that again. So
yeah,
thank you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And as we move forward for the final draft plan, let's use colors that are very different.
Yes.
So that it's very clear. And so if somebody prints it out in black and white, because it's more expensive to print something out in color, they get it online.
Right.
It would be very clear to distinguish. Sounds like a small thing, but I think it just makes it more accessible.
It's really important that it's accessible to the public. All of these things need to be very understandable. So I appreciate that feedback, and we'll definitely
thank you.
Change that in the future. But I think because there's so many smaller properties here, and we understand and respect the concerns of the property owners that are sort of right up against these commercial properties, but they have residential homes. So we've heard that throughout the planning process, and we understand that concern. We are comfortable with what your staff is recommending here in terms of the height and the zoning. So we can certainly walk through it further, but I think we're comfortable with what's presented.
All right. So essentially, the heights are being brought down pretty significantly here by council staff. And it sounds like planning is comfortable with bringing it down, which is a more realistic number to what could be redeveloped here, and has raised some concern in the community of what 100-foot buildings here would look like in certain circumstances. Okay, so can you just summarize the changes that are being recommended, go through them one by one, and then we can see if there are any additional comments from colleagues?
Sure, absolutely. We'll start with the first one that I've mentioned, which is that property, the number 4 in the lighter pink purple, that is recommended for, the planning board had recommended the CRT of 3 with a height of 100 feet, and planning staff recommended CRT of 2.25, C and R both at 1.5 and a height of 70. So that's the difference. And then if looking at the public hearing draft had a height of 70. So this is consistent with the public hearing draft that the staff had put out. It's just a more modest height. It is definitely not near single-family housing at this point, but still a height of 70. And currently the height is 45 in this location.
Yeah, we can talk about it one time. Go ahead. Councilman Ring.
I'll just say that these are small properties, and the neighborhood right there. I don't know how much folks here frequent the pub, but like the parking is atrocious currently, and these are right up against residential, homes right there with neighbors who are currently saying, like, what are you going to do to address the terrible situation that we have now? And so I'm sure you can understand how looking at the proposal is really understandably increasing their angst. So I think that it would make sense to just do 60 across the board, because the same issues are happening. It's one consistent issue that's happening across these areas and is impacting these homes here. So if we're looking for a consistency, then I think that 60 is reasonable. 60, I don't know why it was 100. I think that is crazy that it was 100 feet in the EOF zone previously, if you want to speak to that.
It was most likely came out of the translation when the zoning rewrite occurred, that it was a prior zoning that had gone down, and that zone just allowed up to 100 feet. When we put zones on the map, we had to assign that height, even though it was very unlikely it would ever occur there, but we were stuck because of the nature. We were putting heights and densities on the map now that had not been in the previous zoning map.
Okay. So, all right. So that was never appropriate, really, to what is actually occurring in this location. So I think that a consistent 60-foot height across this area makes sense, but we'll open it up to conversation with colleagues, of course.
Yeah, there's a question that we were having before about whether or not we should increase height. In this case, you're suggesting that we reduce the height of what's currently zoned. I think that is a different standard, although I do understand that the height is higher than what is probably realistic at that site. But generally, we wouldn't take back height that somebody already has on that property. So that is a little bit tricky from my perspective. I'm much more sensitive to the question of should we increase somebody's height, but I do understand the consistency aspect here as well. All right, so there's two different questions really. One is the EOF question of do we lower what is existing zoning that's allowed? Like if we don't pass this master plan, as some people are suggesting that we do, or we don't make any zoning changes, which some people are suggesting that we do, that would be at 100 feet. That's different than everything else that we're talking about, where we're deciding should it go from 40 or 45 that it's currently zoned at to 60 or 65 or 70, or in the case of what they're recommending in certain cases, 100 feet. So I just think those are different dynamics. I just want to note that. Any comments from planning on the current zoning of the EOF site and the current height at 100?
I would recommend to notify the property owner before making that decision, just because the existing zone is 100 feet. So just making sure the property owner is aware of the proposal that you're discussing before making that decision. Because today the EOF is at 100 feet, and that would be important for them to be aware of the potential change. Right now, the property is not built to 100 feet, just to clarify. It is a one-story.
Donuts?
It's the Baskin Robbins.
The Baskin Robbins. Yeah. It's a house.
And the Dunkin' Donuts, excuse me, yes. It's house scale at this time, so I think just
I'm not allowed to say that 4 quarters runs on Dunkin', but I'm pretty sure that's what it says in the marketing materials.
Yeah, one other thing about
Sure,
the
Harris.
one about parking. I think that I know you're concerned, but I think that any developer that would put the investment into redeveloping those projects would make sure that would look into ample parking. Because they would make that investment, and so I think you would probably get potentially more parking there, or if they consolidated properties, they would make sure that they are parked properly. So I think it would look differently if those sites are consolidated and redeveloped.
And if I could, for the record, Jason Sartori, Planning Director, I would concur with Chair Harris on that. I think the opportunity to try to improve that parking situation comes with redevelopment of those sites. And so trying to incentivize that through the increased density is creates opportunities there. And I would just caution quite strongly against down zoning the existing EOF sites. Increased height, increased density creates opportunities. Lowering is removing value and lowering opportunities for those existing property owners. And really careful thought needs to be given to doing that.
All right, I am personally not comfortable, reducing what is currently allowed. I mean, we don't, we're running into, a potential, property right dynamic here, which is a little bit discomforting to me. I do think that I understand what is being suggested here, that 100 feet is just not realistic. Nobody is building 100 foot. They've been able to build 100 feet there. Currently aren't. It doesn't seem like, there is an interest there. But at the same time, there's some sensitivity that I would have. That is very different to how much higher we're increasing somebody's height. I mean, we're providing a benefit, and the question is whether or not we're getting, what we want out of that benefit: additional housing, additional street grid connections, pedestrian safety improvements, other dynamics. I think that's a reasonable conversation to have. I would at least want to hear from any concerns that might have before, just lowering existing zoning at a committee session, personally. I am comfortable with lowering the heights from what was recommended by planning as recommended by staff, because that's a different dynamic of, how much above what is currently allowed should we allow. And I think what was recommended might not be necessary, and so we can lower that number. I think that's a different standard, personally.
Can we put a hold and have staff contact the property owner for the EOF sites? At this point, we should pause it and hear what they want to say for that particular site, the EOF. And everything else, I'm in agreement with the staff to lower the heights, as you mentioned.
Agreed. Okay, so we're going to put a pin in the EOF question. Otherwise, we're going to agree without objection to the staff recommendations on the 60-foot heights here. I mean, and I just will note, there's currently, what's the current use there, 35 feet? Okay, so this is more of a principle than the practical reality of what actually is going to be built and what the interest and the likelihood is. But I do think out of principle, there is a big difference between reducing what somebody's currently allowed to do on their property versus what we're zoning to increase what they're allowed to do on their property. That's a very different standard.
And in likelihood, even if you kept it just as 100 and then stepped down to what, the market's not there to build, they're not going to build it. I'm just saying it's not going to be built to that height anyway. So I think if the owner did say, don't change it, the 100 feet, it probably won't get built anyway. So it's 100 and it steps down after that to what the staff is recommending. I think that would work out just fine, but we're going to check.
All right, and the other alternative would be looking at even firmer step-down language here. So even if you didn't change the height, we could add master plan language that was very significant on this particular site in terms of the step-down requirements, and that way we wouldn't be reducing what is currently allowed, what is currently zoned at, which is not something we traditionally do. I mean, when we did that in the Ag Reserve, we created an entire cap and trade system and provided alternative value to those property owners because we were taking away their rights as property owners. This would be a different standard, but we can get to the same issue in a different way if that is the interest, which I think is something that we should at least explore. Councilman Rink.
Checking in about what decision is being made right now in regards to property that is labeled number 4 in figure 52. That's one of the ones that's in here as 100 foot. I think council staff is recommending 70 foot. I'm asking for 60 foot, and that one is not former EOF. That one was formerly 45 foot.
And I just want to add to that for Councilmember Mink, there's another property which is at 105 to 111 University Boulevard West, where the recommendation was CRT of 3, H of 100, where council staff recommended similar to number 4 that you just mentioned, with a height of 70 feet.
That's right next to the
former
the EOF, or
Yeah.
the current EOF.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that one. Yeah. It would make, on the bottom part of that map, as you're along University, the 1, the 2, and the 4 were at 70, I think all at 70 feet.
And both of those are council staff is recommending 70 feet for both of those, is that correct? Right. For number 2 and number 4 in figure 52, is that correct?
Correct. Sorry, number 1 was 60 because of its location next to the,
Okay.
but that's the EOF property we're talking about.
Yeah, so I would ask that those be 60.
Can you?
Which is already good. I mean, that's a significant increase already for an area that's already, believe it or not, I'm looking for a compromise. That's an area that's already, and I hear from residents all the time, and I experience it myself, it is rough to get in and out of there. I personally make decisions sometimes about whether or not I'm going to go to those businesses based on, do I have time to walk over there because there is not time to go and try, because there's not space to park there, and it's going to take me so much time to drive around and find somewhere in the neighborhood to park. So I understand that we can, as being said, that redevelopment is what opens up opportunities for parking, but that feels very like a promise without a lot of substance there, and the possibility of really making a rough situation significantly rougher. So the 60 foot is a significant increase over what's there already, and it is with redevelopment. We are going to have to find other parking solutions, absolutely, even with the 60 foot. 70 foot, I think so I would ask for those to be 60 foot. I know we're going to return to the conversation about the EOF, and I'll note that the Dunkin' there also is relatively new. They did not, and they could have built to 100 feet. They did not, because it's not appropriate for that space. So.
Excuse me, I appreciate you saying that. The number 4 is the corners. That is like the where you want it to be 60. That's sort of the cornerstone there, and it would be, from a planning point of view, that would want to be the higher. It would want to be the 70 foot. I'm putting it out there and so I hear what you're saying, but I do feel that if that is consolidated, there will be. I think you see what you see today, and you experience what you see today, but I do feel that that corner was redeveloped, that should be the 70 foot height, and there would be parking ample for that corner there. But I hear what you're saying, but if I were going to make the higher somewhere, I would make it there. Okay.
All right, I'm compelled by that. I mean, I think this is, at the corner, that is, a key site. I think being at 70 feet there, I think makes more sense than in other locations. It isn't abutting a neighborhood. If we're going to go with the higher height, I mean, to me, this would be the area to go the higher height. This is where there actually is opportunity. From a land use perspective, it would seem to make a whole lot of sense. 100 feet seems aggressive in any part of this corridor. I mean, that just seems like higher than what is realistic in all honesty. But, being able to get to an opportunity to have community serving retail and housing on top in a signature area is compelling to me. and the opportunities that, potential redevelopment at some point in the next 30 years, would provide would make sense. So just from my perspective, I have understood the interest in lowering the heights significantly across this corridor. I think some of the density is too high, and the heights are too high, but this would be a particular area that I think going a little bit higher within reason would make some sense. And I would be supportive of that if we went 70 feet here and then 60 feet with the other properties as council staff was recommending.
And if it may be helpful to the conversation, we could propose some language related to the parking at the site, because if the property comes forward for a redevelopment, which I understand many of the properties are pretty happy and they're not an urgency to do that, but if it did happen, we could have language in the plan to speak to some of these parking concerns and the circulation to the parking that's going to occur on that site. So that's something that we could add.
Okay. I honestly, knowing this site very well, just because my kids went to the YMCA right there, very close by, so I know this area quite well. I will normally side with the chair because I think what you said makes completely sense. But I also listening to what the community is saying, and I'm gonna agree with the council, with the district council member that all the properties should take at 60 and move on.
All right.
And it's coming from me.
All right.
Imagine that.
So there's a 1-1 vote on that in the committee at 70 feet versus 60 feet at that corner property specifically.
Got it. And then for the remaining properties in this segment that we're talking about, is the committee 2-0, 60 feet. There was one other that was at 70.
I think we should talk about that other property.
Okay. It's number 2 on the map. See the lighter pink 2 at the bottom there, and it has. Not sure what.
I'm less. I mean, the compelling argument was that's the corner site. There's a different standard for that.
Right.
I'm less compelled on that unless there's a compelling rationale
It's
from
like a vet and other
planning
things there.
on that. But let's hear from them if they have one. If not, I'm comfortable going with 60 feet for that site. I will yield to planning staff or the planning chair.
Yeah. We can move forward with the 60 feet.
60 feet. Okay. 2-0 on 60 feet for the rest, including number 2 in the magenta.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move along now. We're at the urban design recommendations for this area. Again, council staff read through them carefully. There was no language that seemed in conflict. And what I'll just remind you is any language here related to transportation decisions that you will make later, we will make sure get to be cleaned up, edited, and consistent with those.
Okay.
Is that good? All right. We are now at the Woodmore Shopping Center. The Woodmore Shopping Center is located in the northeast intersection of Colesville.
Hold on 1 second. We've got district council member has something else to share.
Sorry, okay. Just wanted to note, and I know this is going to be part of conversations that we're coming back to, but on the urban design recommendations, the last one there, or second to last, the redevelopment, looking at consolidating and relocating driveways along University Boulevard to improve the public realm. Just want to note the concerns, again, with that one about making sure that we are not shifting those safety concerns into the neighborhood. So I would ask that we remove that one. The conversations can and still will come up again with redevelopment. Planning can still negotiate for those. State highway can still take those actions without the redevelopment, et cetera. I don't think that we need to have something again affirmatively in here that could also encourage us to put into play something that would have unintended or intended consequences on the neighborhood.
Thank you. That's the second to last bullet. As noted by council staff earlier, she is going to go through and staff is going to go through each of those bullets and every recommendation based on the other decisions that we make. But I appreciate you flagging that specifically so that we ensure that we revisit that. But that's the second to last bullet on staff.
And the only thing I'm
page
just going
17.
to just remind you, there is a difference between connections within the neighborhood versus just consolidating driveways. And this one, I think the idea is if you had 2 or 3 properties together that all abutted university, you might be able to get rid of 1 or 2 of those driveways, and that would actually make the area safer. And this isn't really about the neighborhood. But we'll
I
go
wasn't
back
going to
through
bring
and
it up,
add
but this is a really important point. I was going to bring it up when we talked about the transportation aspects of it. In a place like Westbard, for instance, which has a lot of entrances to a lot of shopping center style and industrial uses that is really poorly planned, done decades ago, and has caused real challenge. Sarah Langenkamp was killed at one of those entrances. And so having a disjointed dynamic of an entrance and then a very short span and then another large entrance and then a short span and then entrance, as opposed to consolidating the entrances and prioritizing the crossing of pedestrians across that street is very important, and particularly in areas where you get delivery trucks, because that is largely what we see into shopping centers and to other industrial uses. We see larger vehicles. They're not personal vehicles for the most part that are causing the biggest concerns. It's much larger vehicles. The consolidation of driveways are very important. So I do think it would be helpful when we think about the language for these to think about how we refer to a driveway and an entrance and an exit, and differentiate between, current single-family homes and any redevelopment along the corridor related to that. And when we're talking about, entrances and driveways, so to speak, related to how you get in and out of a redeveloped, larger property like the ones that we're talking about here. Those are 2 very different things. And I think people understand them in very different ways. And I think sometimes we use similar language because from a planning standpoint, they might be viewed similarly, but from a practical standpoint, I think they're quite different. So I think it's an important point to flag. And I think there's a lot to talk about with that. There's what we do with street grids and what we do with actual street connections and how we prioritize pedestrians. And there's a lot there. And then there's separately everything else that is being addressed and focused on here. So I just wanted to note that. Okay, Councilmember Mink.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then obviously there's a lot of work that we need to do and can do in terms of pedestrian safety. And some of what we're discussing here is some of that work. So thank you for highlighting that distinction and noting also that, just the difference between if we're relocating a driveway to a different, safer spot or consolidating it with another one on University versus relocating it to the interior of the neighborhood and drive, funneling traffic. That those are 2 very different types of relocations. Thanks.
Okay, so we flagged the second to last bullet. There's a lot to talk about there, largely the transportation recommendations related to it. And so our transportation staff member who is present, and I see taking copious notes until we get to his portion. I appreciate that. Unless there's any other comments on this, why don't we continue on with the Woodmore Shopping Center?
Thank you. Right, so we are now going to cover the Woodmore Shopping Center neighborhood, more than just the shopping center itself. But it is located northeast intersection of Colesville Road and University Boulevard East. It does have the shopping center, but there are also, as you can see on the screen, single-family detached homes in this neighborhood. Also, there's an elementary school, and the Catholic St. Bernadette School. As the plan notes, the Woodmore Shopping Center property owner has no immediate redevelopment plans for the site. It is not a huge site. The building takes up quite a bit of it, with some parking in the front and parking in the back. For the site, the plan recommends a privately owned public space consistent with the neighborhood green to support any future new development on the property. The plan also proposes new residential typologies for detached residential properties along Pierce Drive, which is the residential street that's on the back side of the shopping center. So the first land use and zoning recommendation is to rezone the Woodmore Shopping Center from a CRT of 0.75, C.75R of 0.5, and a height of 40 feet to a CRT of 3, C1.5, R2.5, and a height of 100 feet to promote mixed-use development in that area. The public hearing draft had recommended an increase in zoning density and height of a CRT of 2 with a C of 1.5, R of 1.5, and a height of 60 feet, which is an increase over the current zoning, as we just noted, but to a lesser intensity than the board's. And council staff suggest the committee support what was in the public hearing draft as recommended for this site.
Okay, quite a bit of sensitivity and concern. This is like the signature commercial piece of this entire planning area. There was a public hearing draft recommendation. Council staff is recommending we go back to that public hearing draft recommendation. There was a more aggressive approach by the planning board and wanted to see if we could talk about that.
Yes, thank you. Given what we've talked about today, and given this is right at the corner of the Colesville and University, yes, given the sensitivity, it should be less than 100 feet, but it should be more than 60, and I would recommend that it be at least 70 feet, because it is a major corner there, and I think that would give more incentive for developers to build this. If they were going to build a site, I think it is a great site for a 1 or 2 concrete podium and 5 stories of stick over it. So that's why I think it should have some more flexibility than the 60-foot height. Yeah.
Thank you. Any comments from colleagues? Councilor Ming.
Thanks. I do think that first, as we look back at the previous draft, that the staff's recommendation for the shopping center to be evaluated for inclusion in the master plan for historic preservation that had been removed. So I think it's appropriate I would ask that we add that back in. And I know that's very important to the community as well. And I would assume that would mean that it would be added to the locational atlas, or would it not?
It wouldn't automatically be. The board has to take a motion to add something to the locational atlas, but it would be a recommendation of the master plan to at least do an evaluation, as you just mentioned.
Would the evaluation be triggered prior to any redevelopment?
So the public hearing draft, as you stated, had that recommendation to consider the Woodmore Shopping Center for future evaluation as a master plan historic site. So this is really just a placeholder for that future evaluation. There's no determination by staff on its eligibility at this point. And such placeholders have been included in previous master plans, especially for resources that have strong community interest due to the architectural, historical, or cultural importance of a site. So during its work sessions, the planning board removed the recommendation to evaluate the shopping center, and that decision reflected the planning board's priorities for the site and to streamline the plan's focus for this intersection on other pressing issues. Importantly, as you were just asking, the removal of that placeholder does not prevent future consideration. As noted in the planning board's work sessions, any individual, organization, or the Historic Preservation Commission itself may submit a Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties form to the Montgomery Planning Office to request an evaluation for listing a property in the locational atlas or index of historic sites and the master plan. So right now, that was really just a placeholder for future work, and that could still occur, if there's a request submitted to the planning department.
Okay, so even if we put into the master plan here that we're, reinsert the recommendation to do an evaluation, that would not preclude redevelopment from taking place before that evaluation can happen.
No, and also with historic preservation, in terms of adaptive reuse, there's many types of preservation. It could be a facade preservation, it could be whole building preservation, right? So, designation itself does not mean that redevelopment of a site cannot occur.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that the evaluation to be able to happen before we incentivize any kind of major redevelopment here. So I think the priority for the community and I think it makes sense, is to get the order of operations right to do the evaluation first.
I would just note that there's a backlog of sites across the county that are, so even with it being a recommendation in the master plan for this, it's not something that would now be on a trajectory for getting done within a certain number of years. So it certainly wouldn't be done before the council were to make a decision on the zoning of this site.
That's correct. When we have these are usually medium-term, long-term recommendations, and it also just allows the property owner and the public to know that this site's on the planning department's radar and could be considered at a future date.
Councilmember Mink, you still got the floor if you want it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have concerns about incentivizing redevelopment before we're able to do an evaluation. The evaluation that was recommended.
Do you have a recommendation for the site? I mean, staff has recommended that we go back to the public hearing drafts, height and zoning. The planning board increased the total density, residential density and height over the public hearing draft. I think you're raising an additional concern about the historic designation of wanting to make a decision on historic designation before any changes. So I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be more comfortable if we knew that would that evaluation would take place before a redevelopment would move forward. Otherwise, yeah, exactly. Otherwise, that could be redeveloped before the assessment is able to be done. So, I mean, if the committee of the council is going to rezone, then certainly the 60 is a more appropriate height. But that said, I still have concerns about not ensuring that the evaluation can take place beforehand.
For any demolition permits on commercial properties, there is a moratorium on that demolition for a set period of days in the code. And so that would allow for community members, the Historic Preservation Commission, or other interested parties to submit that request to get placed on the locational atlas. Unlike getting placed on the master plan for historic preservation, that is an expedited process that can happen in a relatively quick amount of time. So if this was ever to be redeveloped and that request had not come forward at that time, there would still be opportunities for an interested member of the community to submit that request to the planning department, asking for this to be studied for designation on the atlas.
But that would still be incumbent on the community making sure that they catch that within that window and that they submit the proper paperwork, et cetera. It's not like that would be automatically triggered. If there was language to ensure that that could be automatically triggered, then I think that would increase the comfort level there. But without that and kind of leaving the burden on the community to be tracking it, I have some concerns.
So let me just say this: in order to submit a demolition permit, I mean the process is a long. First, you would have to go through the site plan approval process, correct? And then you go through the building permit process. When they would apply for a demolition permit for the building permit. It could be a couple years from the time someone submits for their site plan approval process. So I think there's plenty of, and then during the site plan approval process, there's the public meeting before they even submit their applications, and then there's the public meetings when the planning board is hearing for the application. So I think that there's plenty of time for the community to know. I mean, and it's public, it's a public process. So I think the community is covered there.
I hear you, but I think also we have to keep in mind that we're working from a deficit right now in terms of community trust, and in terms of community trust that they are going to get the amount of outreach that is needed to reach the people who would flag it, and so so saying that we are reliant on them paying attention and then petitioning for that evaluation at the right time, even if it's a long period of time, which I hear you. I think that again, if there was a way to, if there was language that we could use that would instead not leave it incumbent on the community members to have to be tracking this and then petition it, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, I just want to turn this into like a little bit more tangible, not just a debate back and forth. There's a question of the height, the density, and the zoning. There's a planning board draft recommendation. There's a staff recommendation that is effectively the public hearing draft recommendation. That's decision point, discussion point number one. Related to that, but separate from that, is another discussion point of whether or not we would hold up redevelopment in some form or fashion to provide an opportunity for an evaluation and analysis of whether the Woodmore Shopping Center would be designated for historic preservation and what that would mean. Would it be partial, wholesale, some combination thereof? Who knows? And it sounds like, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding, because it just, we need to kind of turn these into actual recommendations and language. There is an interest from the district council member, based on concerns that she has heard, that there be a more specific trigger to say there has to be an evaluation, and unless and until there's an evaluation, there can't be a redevelopment. Or there's don't rezone it. Like those are the so there's kind of three options here, and I just want to go through those options and see how realistic they are. One, go with the planning board recommendation. Two, go with the staff recommendation, which is effectively the public hearing draft recommendation, which is a lower intensity rezoning, but increasing to 60 feet, not 100 feet, and lower residential density and total density. And then three is allow for the additional height, but not to the 100 feet, the 60 feet. It sounds like there is an interest in from the district council member, but to incorporate some language that says there has to be an evaluation in the master plan.
So it's my feeling, I've never seen a master plan recommendation that is on a property that is contingent on a historic master plan evaluation. So definitely there are master plan recommendations to do that evaluation, but I don't know how you provide a change in zoning, or even not a change in zoning, but you don't allow anything to happen on a property until that evaluation occurs. I've never seen that language in a master plan, and we could do some more research. I think the way you would achieve it is you could put into this master plan that desire for a future evaluation when it's to occur, and you could reconfirm existing zoning. And I think those are the options that you have. I don't know that you can put in to the master plan, nothing can happen on this site until that evaluation occurs.
You heard earlier the public hearing draft conversation of, there would be another option would be to reinsert the public hearing draft language, which is not required, in terms of it's not like unless you do this, you don't get to do that, because that is not something that it sounds like staff thinks is an appropriate approach, but it would incorporate the language into the master plan to show, that it would be part of the public conversation, in terms of master plan conformance. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I'm trying to get to a point where you have a suggestion that you're putting forward to us. So I yield back to you if you have thoughts on that. I'm trying to be helpful to the district council member here as much as I can.
Yeah, so I hear that that you're not familiar with language that would create that exact trigger. If you would be able to come back with some kind of with language that can get us as close to kind of the desired outcome here, so we could see what that would look like, and maybe that's not as close as I would want it, but just to have clarity on what our options are, then that would be helpful.
And just to add, I know that the Art Deco Historical Society, who submitted a testimony to you all, was just looking for that recommendation that it is evaluated in the future be placed back in the sector plan, and we have that language from the public hearing draft. So just reinserting that, it's very similar to the language that's for the Nichiren Shoshu Genji Temple. That also has a future recommendation to look at that. So that would align with what we're recommending for that other property, and its language we've already included in a previous plan. So I think that could be a solution to your concern.
I appreciate that, and I would certainly ask that, that at a minimum that would be put back in there. I think that would be appropriate and in line with our other conversations that we've had. I also remain concerned about the potential for redevelopment happening, being incentivized prior to that evaluation taking place, and this is a location that is really very near and dear to the hearts of a wide swath of the community who lives around there. So in balancing those, I'm expressing a balance of those concerns. So I do want to make sure that the evaluation is indicated in there, and I'm going to have to come back, I think, to full council to figure out what we do about the zoning, because I have concerns there.
Okay, so it sounds like your recommendation is to wait to hear back from planning and to come back to full council on it, that there's no formal recommendation on how to handle historic designation. Let me turn to Councilmember Funny-Gonzalez.
Look, I am ready to say that I agree with the public hearing draft as the council staff is saying. So that's one part, okay? And the second part, I'm going to be in agreement with what the recommendation from the historic preservation staff just mentioned. And I think that will cover everything. So that's my position here.
Okay, I'll go along with that. 2-0. We're going to go back to the public hearing draft, including the historic designation, which is broad evaluation, which is what was requested, and go back to the height at 60 feet and the residential and total density at the lower levels, 2.0, 1.5, 1.5. Okay? All right. And if the district council member wants to put in something that is much more restrictive, she will bring that up at full council.
Okay, thank you. I have that down. There are urban design recommendations again for this site as well. As we've said throughout the whole thing, we will make sure these are consistent with all decisions that are being made, but there was no thing that stood out as in conflict with flexibility or what this plan is trying to achieve. Urban design recommendations, we good?
Any concerns or questions? I know you've come back to this a couple times, so just want to give you a minute to review your notes. Okay, without objection, let's continue.
Okay, we're on the last neighborhood now. We're on the Montgomery-Blair High School neighborhood. It is obviously one of the largest high schools in the county. It is the largest with 3,300 students. The property is approximately 30 acres. There's an existing flash stop located at Colesville near Lanark Way. There's Blair Local Park is co-located with Blair High School and located immediately southeast of the school. There's also the Silver Spring Fire Station number 16 that is adjacent to it. What is also in this neighborhood is in the median to the east of Colesville Road, between the east and westbound lanes of University Boulevard, is the Four Corners Ethiopian Evangelical Church and Silver Spring Day School. The zoning recommendation for this is to reconfirm the R60 zone for the Blair High School, Blair Local Park, Fire Station property shown on the map. And then the second land use and zoning recommendation is to rezone the Four Corners Ethiopian Evangelical Church property. Currently it is R60 and CRT of 0.25, C 0.25, R 0.25, and a height of 35 feet. The planning board has recommended it be rezoned to CRT of 3 with a C of 1.5, R of 2.5, and a height of 100 feet. It's hard to kind of see what that is, but you can see that pink in the top and on the left. That's the church itself. There's a little yellow there. That's the parking lot. That's R60. So this rezoning would be not only changing the base zone on the pink, but it would incorporate the R60 parking into it. So you would have a bigger piece of CRT. Staff recommends something slightly less intensive than the planning board's recommended, and recommends CRT of 2.5, C of 1.5, R of 1.5, and a height of 75 feet. This mimics the planning staff's recommendation for the zoning that was on the same median piece of property, but on the other side of Colesville Road. On that, the committee 2-0 has chosen to be consistent with this, except for the height was limited to 65 feet.
Okay, is there an interest in going to the other median, to be consistent with the other median, which would be the same except for 65 feet? So, Councilmember Fonda Gonzalez?
Yes. I am interested.
Okay, all right, let's do 2-1 on that. We're going to be consistent. I mean, it's a, excuse me, 2-0, consistent with what we did on the other median property we would be doing here. I don't think there's any, unless there's any significant difference between this property and the other property. I think they're very similar from a land use perspective, and so consistency here would make sense. Okay, without concerns from planning or from council staff, we have a 2-0 recommendation on that.
And then last but not least, we have a handful. There's 3 and then 2 bullets related, so 5 total related to urban design recommendations for the Four Corners Ethiopian Evangelical Church property, which we just discussed, and also for the Blair High School site. There was nothing objectionable to council staff standing out with those, and anything that is in conflict with the policy decisions you're making, we will update.
Okay, any questions or concerns on this? Yeah, just wondering, how often do we make recommendations in terms of co-location of uses on school properties in master plans?
We have in the past. It's not inconsistent. Yeah.
Okay. That was my understanding, but we've heard questions about that, so just wanted to note that. Appreciate that. Doesn't seem like there are any concerns or questions here. We're actually having lots of conversations about co-location at school sites. Community health centers are a big part of school sites, and in fact, in places where community health is not justified by the farms rates and the other standards at the school, like places like Poolsville, we're seeing a broader community interest in utilizing the school as a community hub and a community center for broader co-location of services. And so it is an interesting dynamic that we see, where sometimes the school reflects the broader community in terms of the demographics, and sometimes it doesn't, based on the age of the new residents and school-age families versus the older residents, changing dynamics of community, et cetera. And so, co-location of facility and best use of our public sites, I think is a best practice, and it's not abnormal in terms of doing this in other master plans. So with that, without objection, on the urban design recommendations related to the Blair High School district, I think that's a good place for us to stop here with deep apologies to those who came exclusively to talk about transportation. I did just want to note, I think it's going to be really helpful for us to talk about the street designation to start the next meeting. And so if we could be ready to discuss that and to really do a deep dive into the implications of that in terms of the Complete Streets Guidelines, what it means, why it matters, what impacts it would be to not move forward with one designation and instead to move forward with another. I think really understanding that before we make any decisions on it would be helpful and important. And then the street grid, obviously you've heard quite a bit from that today. We're not only going to want to go through the broad-based question of street grid and the applicability. Obviously, if I was starting a planned community from scratch, I would build a street grid. No doubt about that. I don't think there's a lot of question on a best practice there, but we're not building a new community from scratch. We're building, parcel by parcel, piece by piece, property owner by property owner, and we have to understand the implications of making piecemeal changes and what impacts that would have and what the impacts would be, and whether we're trading one safety concern on a corridor with another safety concern within a residential neighborhood, and balancing the vulnerable users, particularly pedestrians, and thinking about pedestrian access, which is critical, but also pedestrian safety, which is first and foremost. So I would hope that we're ready in depth to really deep in discussion of that at our next conversation and meeting, and then we're going to go through and talk. We heard about Gilmore specifically, and that's probably the one that we've heard the most. But we've heard from a number of other ones as well of what a punch out to University Boulevard, or however we want to frame it, would actually mean in reality, what impacts that would have. Again, connecting one street on one side of a major corridor to the other side to make a T intersection is a best practice. There is no doubt about that. However, there are impacts of that, and we're going to need to really talk through that and go through site by site, intersection by intersection, to make sure we really understand what we are moving forward with and hearing about. So I just want to set the stage. That is going to be a big focus of our next conversation, and there is a lot to talk about, and we have heard quite a bit from residents, and we hear you, and we are going to spend the time that we need to talk through it intersection by intersection. You have the committee's commitment to that, and as you saw today, we are not rushing this conversation. We are going through methodically and thoughtfully and painstakingly at times, but that is what this requires, because it's very important work and it has huge impacts on people's lives and livelihoods. Let me turn it over to council staff to close us out, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. So the transportation issues are complicated ones as well, and ones that we've been working with planning staff to provide resources to depict. I just wanted to note for the public record that council staff will have some technical corrections to the Four Corners Street Network element, which is a very complicated one as well, with a lot of different cross sections and right away and all of that. So some technical corrections going into the next work session, just so the packet will look a little bit different. Wanted to highlight that before we close out here.
Okay, well, we appreciate it. I just want to thank again our colleagues, thank again council staff for all the work. Thank you, Department of Transportation, for sitting through this conversation, anxiously awaiting your time in the sun. Unfortunately, that time will have to wait until our next work session, but we appreciate it, and thank you to planning staff and planning board chair and everybody who joined us here in person and who is watching live. With that, colleagues, we are adjourned, and we will return to the University Boulevard Corridor Plan at our future work session.